Hey friends! Glad you're here at Harryverse X. We've cooked up something special. Edward and Bella Cullen found Harry at age 4 in cupboard and vampire bond made him immortal blood prince. Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The cupboard. The rain had been falling since mid-afternoon, the kind that didn't announce itself dramatically but simply settled in, grey and relentless, soaking Surrey into a kind of miserable uniformity. Every house on Privet Drive looked the same in the dark, neat hedges, closed curtains, porch lights burning amber against the wet. The kind of street that prided itself on not having anything worth noticing. Edward Cullen noticed everything. He was sitting in the passenger seat of the rental car with his elbow against the window and his chin on his knuckles, watching the street numbers tick by, though Bella already knew where she was going. She always did. For years of marriage, the human kind, then the vampire kind, and he still found himself marveling at how she moved through the world. Unhurried. Certain. Like she'd already decided how everything was going to go and the universe hadn't figured out yet that it should argue. "You're staring," she said, without taking her eyes off the road. "I'm appreciating. You're distracting yourself." She glanced at him then, just briefly. "What are you hearing?" He turned back to the window. The street was quiet, which meant the minds were quiet, the low hum of television sets, half-formed thoughts about work tomorrow and whether the recycling needed to go out, a teenager 3 houses back rehearsing an argument she was going to have with her mother. Normal. Dull. The specific texture of a neighborhood that had decided, collectively, that nothing interesting would ever be allowed to happen here. Then they passed number 4. Edward sat up. Bella felt the shift immediately. She knew his silences the way she knew her own heartbeat, or had, once, and she slowed the car without being asked. "Edward." He didn't answer right away. He was leaning forward slightly now, very still, the way he went still when something demanded his full attention. His eyes had fixed on the house, ordinary, identical to its neighbors, a light on in the upstairs bedroom and the blue flicker of a television visible through the sitting room curtains. But under the stairs. There was a mind under the stairs, very small and very bright, burning with fever and something else, something that wasn't fever at all, something that crackled at the edges of his perception like a live wire wrapped in cotton, muffled but insistent, like a sound heard through walls that you couldn't quite identify but couldn't stop listening for. And the thoughts themselves. He'd read thousands of minds. Hundreds of thousands, probably, across a century of existence. Children's minds were usually the clearest, wide open, unguarded, running on pure sensation and present tense. But this one was different. This one was folded in on itself, small and tight like a fist, thoughts compressed into the smallest possible space as if the child who owned them had learned very early that taking up room was dangerous. Don't make noise, they'll hear, don't make any noise, it hurts, but don't make noise. Is anyone, is there, no one. No one comes. Stop the car, Edward said. Bella had already pulled over. She didn't ask why. She looked at the house for a moment, and then she looked at him, and he watched her read his face the way only she ever could, that particular gift she'd had even as a human, the ability to see him when he was doing his level best to be unreadable. "How small?" she asked. "Very." She was out of the car before he finished the word. They didn't knock on the front door. Edward could hear the couple inside, Vernon, the mind supplied, thick and self-satisfied, currently watching football with a can of beer sweating on the arm of the chair, and Petunia, sharp and nervous in the kitchen, her thoughts running in tight little circles around something she was trying not to think about directly, the way people did when they were guilty and had gotten good at managing the guilt. He had no interest in alerting them. The side gate wasn't locked. The garden was tidy and dark and smelled of cut grass and petrol from the mower in the shed, and Bella moved through it like smoke, Edward half a step behind her. The rain had let up to a mist now. The kitchen window was lit but the blind was down. The cupboard was built into the space under the front staircase, accessible from inside the house but with a small ventilation gap, barely 2 inches, along the bottom of the outer wall, half hidden behind an overgrown shrub that hadn't been trimmed back as conscientiously as the rest of the garden. Bella crouched beside it without being told. She pressed her palm flat against the exterior wall, very gently, and the expression that moved across her face then, Edward had seen Bella angry before, had seen her cold and had seen her grieve, but this was something different. This was the thing she kept deep, the feeling that had no name except no, absolutely not. Not this. He crouched beside her and listened. The breathing was shallow and too fast. The fever-bright thoughts kept cycling, "Don't make noise, it hurts, no one comes," but underneath them, barely audible even to him, there was something else. Something that had nothing to do with fear or fever. It was the same crackling live-wire energy he'd felt from the car, clearer now, and it pulsed in a rhythm that matched the child's heartbeat, and every few seconds it spiked, and when it spiked the temperature of the air against the wall shifted half a degree warmer. Magic. He didn't have a better word for it, and he knew enough of the world to know that the word wasn't wrong. "We need to get inside," Bella said. Her voice was very quiet. "The couple inside will, Edward." She turned to look at him. "We need to get inside." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Getting in without alerting Vernon and Petunia Dursley was not difficult. The back door was locked with a standard deadbolt, which meant nothing to either of them. Bella was inside first, moving through the dark kitchen with the particular grace of something that had long since stopped apologizing for what it was. Edward followed, easing the door shut behind him, and they both stood still for a moment in the dark, listening to the house. Vernon's thoughts hadn't shifted. Football, beer, faint irritation at something a commentator had said. Petunia was thinking about breakfast. Neither of them was attending to anything as peripheral as an intruder, which said something about what kind of household this was, not the vigilant kind, not the kind that worried about anyone finding things it wanted hidden. The cupboard door was under the staircase, to the left of the front hallway. It had a latch on the outside. Edward looked at that latch for a moment. Just a moment. Then Bella lifted it and opened the door. The smell hit them both at once, blood and fever sweat and the particular damp cardboard staleness of a space that had been sealed too long. Bella's hand caught Edward's arm, not to stop him but to anchor herself, her jaw tight, and he understood because he was doing the same thing, running the same rapid internal calculus that vampires learn to run, not food, this is not food, this is a child, and it was easier than it might have been because the other thing coming off the boy in that cupboard was so overwhelming that it pushed everything else aside. The magic, if that was what it was, hit them like heat from an open oven. The child was curled on a small cot against the wall. He was tiny, far too thin, limbs like sticks inside an oversized t-shirt that had probably belonged to a child 3 times his size, dark hair a wild tangle across the thin pillow. He had a bruise along his jawline that was yellowing at the edges, which meant it was several days old, and a fresher one on his forearm, and his forehead was sheened with sweat. His eyes were open. That was the thing Edward hadn't been prepared for, somehow, that the child would be awake, and would look up at them in the dark with eyes that were very green, extraordinarily green, green in a way that seemed slightly too vivid against the pallor of his face, and he would not make a sound. He just looked at them. Not frightened, exactly. Or rather, he was frightened, Edward could hear it, the spike of alarm in those bright compressed thoughts, but fear was so ordinary to this child that it apparently didn't warrant a reaction. He'd simply learned to be afraid quietly. He saw 2 strangers in the dark of his cupboard and he didn't scream and he didn't cry and he pulled his knees a little closer to his chest and he watched them. 4 years old. They found me, his thoughts offered, without any particular inflection. They found the cupboard. Then, slightly smaller, maybe they have food. Bella made a sound that was barely audible. She sat down on the floor of the cupboard doorway, just sat down, right there, making herself smaller, and held out her hand, palm up, and said nothing. The boy looked at her hand. Then at her face. His thoughts flickered, cold, she looks cold, the lady looks cold and there are no lights behind her eyes, "That's strange, Aunt Petunia's eyes have lights behind them, angry lights, but this lady's eyes." "Hi," Bella said. "Just that." The boy looked at her for a very long moment. "Hi," he said back. His voice was rough from disuse and cracked slightly, and he winced when he said it as if speaking hurt. "I'm Bella," she said. "That's Edward. We're not going to hurt you. I promise." His eyes moved to Edward, catalogued him with that unnerving, too-old steadiness, and came back to Bella. "They hurt me sometimes," he offered. Not accusatory. Just informational, as though he wanted to be accurate. "I know," Bella said. "We're not like them. You're cold." "Yes." He seemed to find this acceptable. He looked at her outstretched hand again, and then very slowly, with the excruciating caution of a child who had learned that reaching for things led to consequences, he put his small hand in hers. Edward watched Bella close her fingers around that tiny hand and felt something shift in the architecture of the night, some quiet irrevocable thing, and he knew, the way he sometimes simply knew things, not from reading minds but from reading the deeper current beneath them, that this moment was going to be one of those hinges. Before and after. The kind you couldn't see clearly until you were well past them and looking back. "What's your name?" Bella asked. The boy hesitated. Then, "Harry." "Harry." She smiled, and it was the real one, the smile he'd fallen in love with, the one that had nothing performed about it. "Can I pick you up, Harry?" Another pause. Weighing. 4 years old and already expert at the calculus of risk. "Okay," he said. She carried him out of the cupboard and through the kitchen and out the back door while Edward stood in the hallway and listened to Vernon and Petunia Desley continue to exist in total oblivious comfort in their sitting room and bedroom, and he thought several things in rapid succession, all of them cold and precise. He thought about going in there. He thought about it in some detail. Then he thought about Harry's face, that watchful stillness, the way he'd said "they hurt me sometimes" with no more emotion than a child reporting the weather, and he decided that Vernon and Petunia Desley's quality of life was something he would return to later, and at greater leisure, and that right now Harry mattered more than they did. He followed Bella out. She was sitting in the back seat of the rental car with Harry in her lap, and the boy was shivering now that the night air had hit him, shivering badly, his teeth just beginning to chatter. The fever was evident even from 3 feet away, the flushed face, the glassy eyes, and when Edward slid into the driver's seat and looked back at them, Harry was trying very hard not to let Bella see how much he hurt. "How bad?" he asked, looking at Bella. "Bad enough." She was checking the bruises with careful hands, and Harry was letting her, watching her face rather than her hands. "The fever's been going a while. He needs, I know." He was already pulling out his phone. Carlyle picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd either been awake or his medical instincts had told him something was coming. With Carlyle, it was usually both. "Edward. We have a situation." He glanced in the rearview mirror. Harry was watching him now, feverish eyes tracking the phone with a focus that was either stubbornness or the kind of desperate present-tense concentration that sick children developed when the world narrowed to the immediate. "We found a child. 4 years old, malnourished, fever, multiple bruises at various stages of healing. We're bringing him to you." A brief pause. Then Carlyle, smooth and professional and, Edward knew, containing several things he was choosing not to say yet, "How far are you?" 4 hours if we push it." "Push it. Is he conscious?" "Yes." "Is he talking to you?" Edward looked at Harry, who was looking back at him in the mirror with those impossible green eyes, and said, "Yes." "Good. Keep him talking. What's his name?" He met Harry's eyes in the mirror. "His name is Harry." He watched something flicker in the boy's face at being referred to directly, at being named out loud by someone who said it like it was simply a fact about the world rather than an afterthought. "Harry," Carlyle said, in that voice he had, the doctor's voice, warm and clean, the one that had been reassuring people for 200 years. "I'll be ready." They stopped once, 40 minutes out, because Harry's shivering had not improved and his temperature had continued climbing in a way that Bella did not like, that Edward did not like, and that Harry himself seemed entirely resigned to in a way that was perhaps the most alarming thing about him. Children fought illness. They complained, they cried, they demanded things. Harry just endured it, quietly, as if suffering were a weather condition that happened to you. Bella had bought a child's paracetamol at a 24-hour petrol station, along with a bottle of water, a packet of biscuits, and a small stuffed animal that she'd picked up without really thinking about it and placed beside Harry on the back seat, and he'd looked at it for a long time before putting it in his lap, and now Harry was sitting up against the door with the stuffed rabbit held loosely in both hands and eating biscuits with the careful, systematic focus of a child who had learned not to waste food, eating quickly in case it was taken away. He hadn't asked where they were going. He hadn't asked when he was going back. He'd asked, once, if Bella was sick, because she was very cold and her skin was very white, and Bella had said no, just different, and Harry had nodded as if different were an entirely satisfactory explanation. "You're not tired?" Bella asked him, around the second hour. "I don't sleep very well," he said. It came out matter of fact, and then he seemed to consider whether he'd said too much, and added, "In the cupboard it's hard." "You sleep in the cupboard?" Bella asked. "That's my room." The silence in the car after that had a specific weight. "Not anymore," Bella said. Harry looked at her. He had a crumb on his chin. "Where will my room be?" "With us. Wherever we are." He absorbed this. Edward, watching the motorway unreal in front of him in the dark, could hear Harry's thoughts, could hear them precisely, the way he heard everything, which was sometimes a gift and sometimes felt like standing too close to a speaker that was turned up too high. The boy was doing something that was, for a 4-year-old, extraordinarily complex. He was running a kind of quiet internal argument, testing the statement wherever we are for traps, for the kind of too good thing that had conditions attached, that got taken back. He was very good at it. He'd clearly had a lot of practice. Then, just under the surface of all that careful calculation, small and stubborn as a seedling, hope. Edward did not say anything. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands steady on the wheel. But he thought, quietly and with the kind of certainty that had nothing to do with logic, yes. That's right. Hope. The crackling magical energy pulsed again and the temperature in the car rose a single degree. Carlyle met them at the door. The house in Portland they were using, between the Forks house and a trip to Maine that had been interrupted by Harry, was a rental, modest by Cullen standards, but Carlyle had enough equipment in the back bedroom to run a respectable examination, and he moved Harry from Bella's arms to the examining table with a practiced, gentle efficiency that Harry watched with wide eyes and accepted without flinching, which told Edward that Harry was either very brave or very accustomed to adults handling him as objects rather than people, and he was darkly aware that the answer was probably the second thing. Esme appeared from the kitchen with a mug of something warm. She always had something warm, it was practically supernatural, though she'd say it was just preparedness, and settled herself nearby with the kind of quiet, anchoring presence that she'd been offering people for a century. Harry looked at her. She smiled at him. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said back. "I'm Esme. Are you hungry?" He weighed this with the same careful caution, decided it wasn't a trick, and said, "Yes, please." The please nearly undid everyone in the room. Carlyle worked quickly and said little, which was his way, calm, thorough, making each step feel ordinary to reduce the patient's anxiety, and Harry watched everything with those fever-bright eyes and didn't resist any of it. Temperature was 103. He was dehydrated. The bruises were consistent with blunt force trauma. "A hand," Carlyle said quietly to Edward while Harry was distracted with a cup of broth that Esme had materialized, and they were layered, which meant frequent and ongoing. He was significantly underweight for his age. His vision, Carlyle suspected, was quite poor and had been for some time. What happened to his head? Edward asked, because there was something, a faint scar, almost entirely faded, in the shape of a lightning bolt, on the boy's forehead. The skin there felt different to him in a way he couldn't entirely articulate. Carlyle looked at it for a long moment. This is old. Very old, from infancy, I'd say. It healed unusually. The tissue here is, he paused, which for Carlyle meant something was genuinely surprising him. It's different. The cells are different. Like something rewrote them. Edward looked at the scar. The crackling live wire energy was stronger near it. Not threateningly, but insistently, like a sound that wanted to be heard. There's something about him, Carlyle. Something I haven't, I know, Carlyle said. I can feel it. You can feel it? Carlyle met his eyes. Can't you? It's like standing near a very old library. Harry, from the table, said, "Are you talking about my magic?" Both of them looked at him. Harry was holding his cup of broth in both hands and looking at them with the expression of someone who had said something and was rapidly recalculating whether they should have. "I'm not supposed to say that," he added. Then, after a beat, Aunt Petunia says it's not allowed. The word. Magic? Edward said. Harry flinched slightly at him saying it, an involuntary brace for consequence that relaxed when no consequence came. "We're not your Aunt Petunia," Bella said, from beside the door where she'd been watching. Her tone was light. Factual. Say whatever you want. Harry looked at her for a moment. Something in his small face shifted, the tightness around his eyes, the held-in quality of his whole expression, and he looked back at his broth and said, quietly, "Sometimes things happen. When I'm upset or scared things happen and I don't mean for them to. Light switches turn on. Once I turned a teacher's hair blue." Carlyle made a sound that might have been a very restrained laugh. "What did she do?" Screamed. A small pause. "I had to stand in the corridor for the whole day." "That seems unfair," Esme said. Harry looked at her. "They said I did it on purpose." "Did you?" He thought about this with the solemn focus of a child attempting absolute honesty. "A little," he admitted. This time even Edward smiled. Around 3 in the morning, the fever broke. Harry had been drifting, not quite asleep, not quite awake, the particular liminal state of a child running too hot, murmuring occasionally and shifting restlessly on the narrow bed they'd set him in, the stuffed rabbit tucked under his arm with a certainty that suggested he'd made some kind of important decision about it. Bella sat beside him and Edward stood in the doorway, and they were not speaking because they didn't need to, and Carlyle had checked Harry twice more and left something on the bedside table and said "Call me" with the kind of brevity that meant "I mean it." The magical energy had been building all evening. Slowly, the way weather builds, that incremental pressure change, the sense of the air thickening. Edward had been tracking it half-consciously for hours, the way he tracked heartbeats and temperatures and the 1,000 small data points his body collected without his asking it to. It rose with the fever and it pulsed when Harry murmured, and when the child's face screwed up with some dream pain, it spiked hard enough that the lamp on the bedside table flickered. "Edward," Bella said. "I see it." Harry's temperature was still dropping, which was good, but his breathing had changed, faster, shallower, and beneath the skin of his forearms something was faintly, barely visibly luminescent, blue-white and shifting like bioluminescence seen through water, and none of them had a framework for this because none of them had seen anything like it. Then Harry stopped breathing. Not in a dramatic way. He simply paused. The way you'd pause mid-sentence. And in the pause the magical energy detonated silently outward in a wave that pressed against Edward's chest and made Bella's hair move and the lamp bulb blue entirely, and in the sudden dark the blue-white light under Harry's skin was vivid and unmistakable, running up his arms and throat in patterns that looked almost like, "Get Carlyle," Edward said. "Already texted," Bella said, because she was Bella and she had been doing 17 things at once. But in the next second she was moving, crossing the room in a stride, dropping to her knees beside the bed, and her hands found Harry's face, and she said his name twice, urgently, low, and on the second repetition he breathed again, gasped, and his eyes flew open wide. The light under his skin flared. And then something happened that Edward would spend years trying to fully account for. Harry's magic, that live-wire energy, that pulsing crackling impossible thing, hit Bella's hands where they touched his face, and the contact didn't repel, didn't deflect the way physical force usually deflected off her when her shield was up. Instead it sank in. It went through her skin and her cold blood, looking for something, and it found the venom in her system, found it the way a spark finds fuel, and for one suspended, breathless second it lit up something in Bella that Edward had never seen lit up before, never in 4 years, and she made a sound he had never heard her make, and her eyes went white. Not red. Not gold. White. Then Harry's whole body arched and he cried out, a child's frightened sound, high and sharp, and Bella grabbed him and held him and said, it's okay, Harry, I've got you, even as her eyes slowly came back to amber. But something had happened. In the holding, in the cry, in the shock of contact between magic and venom, something had transferred. Not changed. Not turned. Something had moved from one to the other and settled, permanently, the way things settle when they find their right place. Carlyle came through the door at a dead run, or what looked like a run to human eyes, and found Bella kneeling on the floor with Harry in her arms and Harry pressing his face against her shoulder and breathing hard, and the room still carrying a charge in the air like the aftermath of a lightning strike. What happened? Carlyle demanded. I don't know, Bella said. She pulled back slightly and looked at Harry's face, checked his eyes, both of them, and Harry let her, still breathing fast. His eyes were very green and entirely aware, and the luminescence under his skin was gone. He stopped breathing and she stopped. There was contact, Edward said, because he'd seen it. Between the magic and her venom. Carlyle, the magic went through her. Carlyle looked at Harry. He held out a hand and Harry, without being asked, put his small hand in it. Carlyle was still for a long moment. His blood, he said quietly. What about it? It's different. Carlyle looked up. I could feel it from here. It was different before, but now there's venom in it, Edward. Not enough to turn him. Not converting. But it's there, woven in, and the magic has claimed it. Used it. He shook his head slowly. In 200 years of medicine, human and otherwise, I have never seen anything like this. Harry had been listening to all of this with the focused attention of a child processing something complicated, and now he said, with remarkable composure for someone who just lit up like a lantern from the inside, is that bad? Carlyle looked at him. I don't know yet, he said, with the honesty of a doctor who respected the people in his care too much to lie to them. But I don't think so. Oh, Harry said. He seemed to consider this adequate. He leaned his head back against Bella's shoulder and closed his eyes. In the doorway, Esme had appeared at some point, soundlessly, as she did, and she and Edward exchanged a look over the heads of everyone else in the room, the particular look of people who were watching something that had no name yet and already knew, bone deep, that it had changed things. He needs to sleep, Bella said. To Harry, you're okay. You're safe. Harry's hand, small and trusting and carrying now in its blood the echo of something that hadn't existed in the world 20 minutes ago, curled into a fist against her arm. I know, he said. He was already half asleep. You're different. Yes, Bella said. I like different, he murmured. He slept. The house settled. Somewhere outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the pre-dawn silence of a Portland street was as ordinary as silence could be, and inside the house on that quiet street a 4-year-old boy who had never in his life been entirely safe drifted into the first genuinely restful sleep he had ever known. Edward stood at the window and watched the dark outside and felt the shape of the night change around all of them. Bella came to stand beside him, Harry still asleep on the narrow bed behind them. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. They didn't need to. The decision had been made in the garden on Privet Drive when she sat down on the floor and held out her hand, palm up, and it had been made a second time in this room, and all that remained now was everything that came after. "Are we doing this?" he asked, just to say it aloud. "We already did it," she said. He looked at Harry, that thin face, dark hair wild against the pillow, the stuffed rabbit held in one hand with absolute conviction. The scar on his forehead, pale and lightning-shaped, catching the thin light from the window. Something about the boy was already different from the something that had been different an hour ago. Subtly, the way a sky is different after a weather system has moved through it. As if a thing that had been trying to exist in one form had found a better one. "Carlyle will want to run more tests," Edward said. "He'll have time," Bella said. "We're not going anywhere." Edward listened to Harry's heartbeat, steady now, fever-free, the rhythm of a child in deep and comfortable sleep, and beneath it, barely audible, a second rhythm that was new to the world, that was the sound of magic and venom learning each other, and would go on learning for years. He thought, "We found him." Then he thought, "No. He found us." Then he stopped thinking and just listened to the boy sleep. Chapter 2, What the Venom Made. 3 years is long enough to forget a before. Harry didn't forget, he was too sharp for that, too internally watchful, but the memories of Privet Drive had taken on the quality of something experienced by someone else, a child he'd been briefly and then left behind. The cupboard. The fever. Aunt Petunia's voice cutting through walls like something designed specifically to cut. He carried all of it the way you carry a scar, aware of it when the light hit a certain way but no longer defined by it. What he was defined by, in the autumn of 1994, was considerably more interesting. He was 7 years old and he could do things that made Jasper put down his book and Emmett grin like he'd just won a bet, and he'd learned 3 languages because Edward had mentioned once that he found multilingualism useful and Harry had taken that and run with it. And he could scale the Douglas firs in the backyard faster than Emmett if he used a particular combination of intent and the pushing outward feeling that he still didn't have a proper word for. He was small for his age, the early malnourishment had left some marks that even Carlyle's careful attention couldn't fully undo, but what he lacked in size he made up for in a quality that the whole family had various names for. Alice called it presence. Emmett called it impossible to ignore, like a fire alarm you can't find the button for. Edward, more accurately, called it intent. The ability to want something with every part of himself simultaneously, and have the world notice. Bella called it Harry, which she felt covered it adequately. The thing about Forks was that it rained, which was convenient for all parties, and it was small, which was less convenient but manageable. The Cullen house sat back from the road on enough acreage that the nearest neighbor couldn't see the backyard, which mattered because the backyard was where things happened. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, something was happening. Edward sat on the back porch steps with a cup of coffee he was not drinking, because he never drank it, he just found the warmth of the mug useful for the impression of normality, and he watched Harry stand in the center of the yard with his arms at his sides and his eyes narrowed and his whole face carrying the expression that they'd all learned to recognize, the look of someone listening to a frequency that only they could hear. 3 seconds passed. Then the leaves. Every fallen leaf in the yard, and there were hundreds, it being October and the trees being generous, lifted simultaneously from the ground and hung suspended in the air at varying heights, and then very slowly began to rotate around Harry in a loose, unhurried spiral, like the arm of a galaxy in miniature, orange and red and gold turning in the grey morning light. Harry turned his head to look at Edward without breaking the suspension. 3 seconds faster than yesterday, he reported. I noticed, Edward said. What are you doing differently? Harry thought about it. The leaves kept turning. Not pushing so hard. Yesterday I was pushing at them. Today I just asked. And they listened. Everything listens if you talk to it the right way. He said this with the serenity of a 7-year-old reporting something completely obvious. That's what Bella says. What do I say? Edward asked. You say intent is a language. Harry let the leaves down, gently, each one settling where it had been. Nothing rushed, nothing dropped. Same thing, different words. He turned around and walked toward the porch steps, and Edward moved to make room and Harry sat down beside him and helped himself to the abandoned coffee mug just to hold it, which was a habit he'd developed in the first year and never stopped. He liked warm things, which was something they'd all quietly filed away as information about what the cupboard had been like in winter, and they sat together looking at the yard. "Carlyle wants to run the new tests today," Harry said. "I know. More blood samples. Too." Harry shrugged. He'd long since stopped minding the tests. He understood the reasoning. Carlyle was careful and meticulous, and the careful meticulousness was specifically pointed at Harry's well-being, and the understanding made the compliance easy. He held out his arms sometimes before Carlyle even asked, which drove Carlyle to a kind of fond exasperation that everyone found enjoyable. "My magic's doing something new," Harry said. Edward looked at him. "What kind of new?" Harry set the coffee mug on the step and held up his left hand, palm facing up, and looked at it steadily. For a moment nothing happened. Then, at the exact center of his palm, a small ball of light appeared, not like a flame, not quite like electricity, something between the two that had a quality of purpose about it that mere light didn't normally carry, and it pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and the rhythm of his heartbeat was, if you knew what to listen for, in counterpoint with a second rhythm underneath, the Venom and magic beat that had been there since Portland, since the night in the rental house. The light held steady. Then Harry did something subtle, a shift in whatever internal register he worked in, and the color deepened from gold-white to a vivid cold blue, and the temperature of the air around his hand dropped by several degrees. Then warmer again. Then, very carefully, he let it go out. "That's the cold part," he said. I think that's your part. Yours and Bella's." Edward was quiet for a moment. "The venom. I don't really know how to explain it. It's like," Harry searched for words with the frustration of someone who was more precise in thought than in speech. "You know how you said you can always tell when I'm in a room even when you're not reading my mind? Because I'm warm. Yes. I can feel both things. The warm part is mine, I think, the part one was born with. And the cold part is," he gestured loosely, "borrowed. But it's mine now. If that makes sense." "It makes sense," Edward said, because it did. He'd been aware of it for 3 years, the way Harry's magical signature had changed in the weeks after Portland, deepened and layered, the way a melody gains a harmony. The venom hadn't overwritten anything. It had added to it. What it had added was still something Carlyle was working on understanding. "Bella thinks I might be able to do a shield," Harry said, very casually. "Like hers." Edward looked at him. Harry looked back, and there was something wicked in his 7-year-old face, the first ghost of the expression he'd develop more fully in years to come, the look of someone who found the effect he had on people genuinely entertaining. "She's been teaching me," he said. "Since when?" "August." Edward thought about the fact that his wife and his son had been conducting what were essentially private training sessions since August without mentioning it to him, and then he thought about the fact that he could have simply read either of their minds and chosen not to, and decided that this was in fact entirely fair. "Can you?" he asked. Harry held up his right hand, palm out, and there was a shimmer, barely visible, like the air above a hot road, and Edward felt it, the particular pressure resistance that he associated entirely and specifically with Bella, except smaller, more concentrated, and threaded through with something warmer. He reached out and pressed 2 fingers toward Harry's palm and they stopped half an inch away, encountering something that had no physical substance but was absolutely, immovably there. "Bella's covers everything at once," Harry said. "Mine is still just where I point it. But it's getting bigger." Edward withdrew his fingers. The shimmer vanished. He looked at his son, and he'd long since stopped needing to qualify that word in his head, or reach for alternatives. Harry was his son, simply, as solidly as any biological fact, and felt the particular mix of pride and careful attention that seemed to be the predominant experience of fatherhood. "Don't lead with it," he said. "In a real situation, if something is actually threatening you, don't start with the shield." Harry frowned. "Why not?" Because if whoever it is doesn't know you have it, you've learned something important about them before they know anything important about you. He paused. Information is a weapon. And it's a weapon you can only use once. Harry absorbed this, turned it over, nodded slowly. The way he processed things, quickly, but never superficially, had been one of the first things Edward had noticed after the fever broke in Portland. The boy thought. Not just reacted. He thought, and then he acted on the thinking, and the acting tended to be precise. You sound like Jasper, Harry said. Jasper sounds like good sense occasionally. Don't tell him that, he'll never stop talking about it. The tests were in the mid-morning, in Carlyle's study, which had evolved organically into something between a library and a laboratory, bookshelves along two walls and a cleared worktable along the third and a tall window that let in the specific greenish forks light that came through the tree canopy. Harry sat on the table and gave his arm without complaint while Carlyle worked, and Esme sat in the reading chair in the corner with a book she was not reading, because she was listening to Harry describe his morning in the yard with the animation of a child who knew he had an audience and liked having one. Carlyle catalogued everything he found and compared it against 18 months of careful documentation, and the picture that had been building for 3 years came into somewhat sharper focus. Harry's blood was not vampire venom and it was not human blood. It was both, fused at a cellular level in a way that should have been impossible and apparently hadn't cared about that. The magical component, which Carlyle had, after much deliberation, started labeling as bioelectric field in his notes because it was the most defensible terminology he could find, was woven through everything, blood and tissue and apparently the bone itself based on the density readings, and it was not static. It was growing. Every set of tests showed it stronger, more complex, more integrated. The venom component had done something he hadn't anticipated. Vampire venom, in its ordinary function, moved through human blood and rewrote cells. Conversion was a violent process, comprehensive, one-directional. In Harry it had been stopped, somehow, in the early stages of that process, and then the magic had claimed the partial work and made it something new. The cells the venom had partially altered before the magic intervened were not vampire cells and not human cells. They were, as Carlyle had started privately calling them, dual state, capable of doing things that neither type could do alone. What this meant practically was a list that had been getting longer every month. Harry healed faster than a human, not instantly, not the way a vampire healed, but a cut that should take a week was gone in a day. His senses were sharper than they should have been for a child his age, not supernaturally so but noticeably, the kind of sharpness that made him aware of conversations in adjacent rooms when he was specifically attending. He was stronger than he should have been, not remarkably so, but consistently and increasingly, and it expressed not as bulk but as efficiency. The way his body used force was different, more deliberate. And the magical ability to regulate his own temperature meant that he ran warm but not feverishly so, a steady, animal warmth that the whole family had, over 3 years, unconsciously oriented toward the way you orient toward a fireplace in a cold room. The venom markers are more pronounced than last month, Carlyle said, turning the microscope slide into the light. Is that good? Harry asked. It's interesting, Carlyle said, which was as close as he got to I don't know. Your magic seems to be using them more actively. There are cellular structures here that weren't present 6 months ago. He paused. Harry, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly rather than trying to figure out what I want to hear. Harry met his eyes. Okay. Do you feel different? Not physically, internally. In the way you experience your own power. Harry thought about it for long enough that the answer was clearly considered. More, he said. It feels like more. Like, before it was one room. Now it's a room with a door in it, and there's another room through the door, and I haven't really gone into the second room yet but I can feel how big it is. He looked at Carlyle. Is that what you were asking? That's exactly what I was asking, Carlyle said quietly. He met Esme's eyes over Harry's head and she returned the look with the particular expression she had, tender and slightly terrified, in the way you were terrified by beautiful things, and Carlyle went back to his notes and wrote bilateral access beginning and underlined it. The first real test came that afternoon. Not designed. Not a training session. The kind of test that shows up unscheduled and without the courtesy of a warning. Harry was in the side yard with Emmett, which was, as Edward had noted many times, an inherently volatile combination, because Emmett operated on the theory that the best way to assess anyone's capabilities was to immediately push them past their comfortable limit, and Harry had learned early to rise to this bait every single time, with no apparent interest in the concept of self-preservation. They were currently arguing about whether Harry could redirect a thrown object without touching it. "You said you can move things," Emmett said. "I said I can move things when I focus," Harry said. "So focus faster." Harry looked at him with the flat patience of a 7-year-old who had identified exactly what was happening and was making a choice. "You're going to throw something at my head. I'm going to throw something near your head. There's a difference. A very small difference. It'll test your reaction time." "Emmett," Harry said. "You could throw a car through a wall." "I promise I won't throw a car." A pause. "Probably." What Emmett threw was a pine cone. From about 30 feet, at a velocity that would have left a significant bruise on a human child, aimed, and this was the part that Edward, watching unseen from the tree line with his arms folded, found either admirable or reckless depending on his mood, directly at Harry's face. Harry's eyes tracked it. The pushing outward feeling happened between one heartbeat and the next. The pine cone stopped. Not slowed, stopped, dead, in the air 3 feet from Harry's nose, suspended as completely as the leaves had been that morning, except that this was reactionary, unprepared, pulled from a standing start with almost no warning, and it held for a full 5 seconds before Harry released it and it dropped into the grass. Emmett stared at it. Then at Harry. "Again," Harry said. "Harry, Emmett." He spread his hands. "Again. Don't aim at my face this time, aim at my chest. And throw it harder." Emmett looked at the pine cone on the grass and then back at this 7-year-old with his chin up and his eyes absolutely alert and something warm and electric running under his expression, and he laughed, that enormous, furniture-shaking Emmett laugh, and picked up 3 pine cones. He threw all of them at once. Harry stopped them all. Not immediately, not neatly, one of them grazed his shoulder before he caught it, and the effort of holding all 3 clearly cost him something, his jaw tightening and the air around him shimmering with that barely visible heat distortion that accompanied high-intensity use, but he held them. 3 points of stillness rotating slowly, and Harry looked at each one and then lowered all 3 to the ground simultaneously and stood there breathing harder than usual with his eyes bright. "Okay," Emmett said, with a sincerity that was rare from him. "That was legitimately impressive." "The third one nearly got past me," Harry said. He pressed 2 fingers against his shoulder where the graze had been. Already the mild sting of it was fading. "I need to work on split attention." "You stopped 3 things thrown by a vampire and you're talking about what you need to work on." "You threw them slowly." "I threw them, Harry, I could throw those through a wall, but you didn't," Harry said. "You were being careful because I'm 7. Don't be careful." He picked up one of the pine cones and turned it in his hand. "How am I supposed to know where my limits are if nobody tests them properly?" Edward, in the tree line, thought, "This is my son." He felt the warmth of it in whatever approximated a chest in his condition, and he said nothing, and he watched Harry and Emmett argue about the appropriate amount of force to apply to a 7-year-old, and he let it run for exactly as long as it took for Emmett to start looking genuinely tempted. Then he stepped out from the trees and said, "Lunch, Harry." Harry turned and looked at him with the expression of a person who knows they are being extracted from something interesting on purpose. "We were just getting to the good part," he said. "The good part can wait until after lunch and after Carlyle signs off on the shoulder." "The shoulder's fine." "After Carlyle signs off on the shoulder," Edward said again, mildly. Harry considered arguing. Then he evidently calculated his odds, which had been good enough for long enough that he now understood when they weren't, and he pocketed the pine cone, which he did with the complete unconscious naturalness of someone claiming a trophy, and headed for the house. Rosalie was in the kitchen. This required some context, because Rosalie in the kitchen was not natural habitat but specifically, these days, had become the room where she went when she wanted to be near Harry under circumstances that allowed her to maintain the dignity of plausible deniability. She was, in her way, as attached to him as anyone, and expressed it exclusively through acts of indirect service, food appearing, things being fixed before he noticed they were broken, homework problems left for her to look at on the table, and absolutely refused to acknowledge that any of this was happening. Harry had figured this out at approximately age 5 and never mentioned it, which was possibly the most sophisticated emotional intelligence move in the house. She was making grilled cheese, which Harry could eat and enjoyed and which required no actual sustenance from her, and when he came through the back door she slid the plate across the counter without looking up from the culinary magazine she was reading. "Thank you, Rosalie," Harry said. "I was just using the pan," she said. "Right," he said, and sat down. She turned a page. He ate half his grilled cheese and then said, without looking up, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "A letter came last week for the people who lived here before us," he said. "A weird letter. The handwriting was different and the envelope was a different kind of paper. I didn't open it but the return address was, I couldn't read it properly but I think it had the words admissions and school." Rosalie set down the magazine. Slowly. "It wasn't for us," she said. "No," Harry agreed. "But it was the third one. The first two went to the people on the other side of town, different name, but," he paused. "They weren't for those people either, were they?" Rosalie looked at him. He looked back. He'd had 3 years of living with 7 people who ranged from extremely private to professionally evasive, and he'd gotten very good at reading silences. "Edward should tell you," she said. "Edward would tell me Carlyle should tell me, and Carlyle would say it's not medically urgent and suggest we revisit it when I'm older, and Bella would tell me but she'd wait for Edward to tell me first because she thinks he should." He tilted his head. "You just tell me." Rosalie, very much against her will, almost smiled. "There's a school," she said. "A school for—" She stopped because Edward had appeared in the doorway. The look he gave Rosalie was not angry. It was the look of someone who had arrived at a conversation already in progress and was rapidly calculating how much damage control was available to him. "Harry," he said. Harry turned in his chair. "The school," he said. "For people like me. The magic kind." He watched Edward's face. "There is one." Edward came and sat at the table across from him, and the straightforwardness of the gesture was itself a kind of answer. When Edward sat down for a conversation, it was always the kind of conversation where he decided that the full truth was the only option. "In Scotland," Edward said. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It accepts students at 11. I'm 7. Which means we have 4 years to decide." Harry considered this. He ate a bite of grilled cheese. "Decide what, exactly?" "Whether we want them to know where you are," Edward said. "The school is part of a larger world, a community of people with abilities like yours. Wizards, witches. They have their own society. Their own laws. And they've been looking for you." He held Harry's gaze steadily. "Not the school, specifically. But their government, and a man named Dumbledore, who runs the school. They've been trying to find you since you were a year old. Since your parents," he stopped. Harry was very still. "My parents," Harry said. They'd had versions of this conversation, but never the full version, because the full version required information that the Cullens had been gathering carefully and were not certain they had complete. Edward had told him, early, that there had been a before, that there was a world he'd come from before Privet Drive, before the cupboard, and that it hadn't been safe and that people in it had made choices that had led to a 4-year-old on a cot under a staircase. He hadn't told him everything. "Your parents were wizards," Edward said. "They were killed when you were a year old by another wizard, someone very powerful who wanted you dead as well. You survived, and that," he paused. Your survival is something that their world doesn't fully understand. You have a scar. Harry's hand went to his forehead. Old, automatic. He'd done it since he was old enough to notice it was there. They know about the scar, Harry said. They know about the scar. To their world, you are significant. Historical, in a way. The boy who survived something unsurvivable. Harry sat with this for a moment. He looked at the table. Then he looked up. And the man who killed them, he said. Is he still? We don't know, Edward said honestly. There are reports that he's gone. Not dead. Gone. Something happened when he tried to kill you and it didn't, he chose the words carefully. It didn't work the way he intended. Because of my magic. Because of your magic. And because of whatever your parents did to protect you. Edward watched his son's face. Harry. I need you to understand something. None of this, none of what happened to you before we found you, defines what you are now. You are not a historical event. You're not a symbol. Whatever that world has decided to call you is not who you are. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then, but I have to go back to it eventually. Not if you don't want to. But if someone's still out there who killed my parents, Harry's voice was entirely steady. Not performatively steady, just genuinely, matter-of-factly calm. Then it's not really a question of whether I go back. Is it? It's more a question of how. Edward held his gaze. This, right here, was the thing about Harry that none of the books on child development had prepared them for, the moment when the child looked at an enormous, threatening fact and simply picked it up and started deciding what to do with it. Not brave in the way people meant when they said brave, meaning scared but doing it anyway. Brave in the deeper, stranger sense of not being organized around fear in the first place. On your terms, Edward said. That's what matters. If you go back to that world, when, not if, you're right, it will be on your terms. Not theirs. Harry nodded. Finished his grilled cheese. Said, to Rosalie, without missing a beat, this is better than yesterday's. Rosalie turned a page of her magazine. I know, she said. Late that night, after Harry was asleep, Edward and Bella stood in the kitchen and Carlisle and Esme sat at the table and Alice was perched on the counter with her legs folded, and nobody was speaking because they were all thinking the same thing and waiting for someone to say it. Alice said it. The letters are going to keep coming, she said. And they're getting more accurate. The last one had the street name right. They're tracking the magic, Carlisle said. Not him specifically. The power signature. Which has been increasing every month, Bella said. At the rate it's increasing, Alice said, with the specific measured tone she used when she was reporting a vision rather than an opinion, they'll have an exact address within 8 months. Silence. Then we move, Esme said. Simple. Final. We've moved twice already, Rosalie said, from the doorway. And it's working less well each time. His magic is, he's not hiding it, Esme. He doesn't hide anything. The radius is expanding. He shouldn't have to hide it, Bella said. No, Rosalie agreed, and it carried a weight of feeling that Rosalie usually kept banked. He absolutely shouldn't. So we move again, Edward said. And we keep moving until we decide we're ready for that conversation. He looked around the table. When he's 11. The school will send an actual representative and he'll be old enough to be part of that conversation. We don't hide. We don't disappear. We manage the timeline on his behalf until he can manage it himself. And the other thing, Alice said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She met Edward's eyes. Her expression was careful, which from Alice meant the vision was specific and she was choosing how to present it. The Volturi, she said. I started seeing them in his future about a month ago. Nothing immediate. Nothing certain. But they know, Edward, or they will know, soon enough. Something unprecedented existing in the world, arrow doesn't leave that unexamined. The silence that followed had a different quality. How long? Edward asked. 3 years. Maybe 4. She held his gaze. After Hogwarts, most likely. When the magical community formally has him registered and the documentation exists. Arrow has eyes everywhere, including in that world. Bella, who had been standing very still, said, "Let them come." She said it without heat, without bluster, in the tone of someone who had already run the calculation and was satisfied with the result, and Edward, who loved her completely and without reservation, heard underneath it the specific frequency of a mother who had made a decision and intended to be immovable about it. "Let them come," she said again. "Harry will be ready." Upstairs, asleep in the room that had been his for 3 years, with the window that let in the tree sounds he liked, and the books stacked in the order that made sense to him but no one else, and the stuffed rabbit that lived on the shelf now because I'm 7, Edward, it's for keeping things on shelves. Harry Potter made a small sound in his sleep and turned over and the air around him pulsed with warmth that was part magic and part something newer. Something that hadn't existed before a Portland night 3 years ago, something that still didn't have a proper name. Outside, the Forks rain came down steadily. The family sat in the kitchen and talked in low voices about the future, about Volturi and schools and wizarding governments and what it meant to keep a child safe who was simultaneously the least and most vulnerable person any of them had ever met, and they talked for a long time. In the morning Harry came downstairs at 6:30 and made himself toast and asked Edward if he could practice the heat-cold transition in the backyard after breakfast and Edward said yes and Harry said good and ate his toast with the cheerful, grounded energy of a child who had chosen, without making a performance of it, to love the life he'd been given. It was, Edward thought, the bravest thing he'd ever seen. Chapter 3, The Letter. The owl arrived on a Tuesday. Not metaphorically, not by post, not via any of the forwarding services that the Cullen family had established through 3 moves and 2 countries in the past 7 years. An actual owl, tawny and enormous and entirely self-possessed, which landed on the kitchen windowsill at 7 in the morning and tapped the glass with its beak in the manner of something that had been told to deliver a letter and intended to do exactly that regardless of anyone's opinion on the matter. Harry was the one who opened the window. He'd been standing at the counter eating cereal, a habit Esme had introduced and Harry had adopted with the specific enthusiasm of someone for whom regular meals were still, on some cellular level, a novelty worth appreciating. And the owl landed on the counter beside his bowl and stuck out its leg and Harry took the letter with a calmness that suggested he'd been half expecting this for years, which he had. Edward came into the kitchen 30 seconds later. Harry held up the letter. The envelope was heavy cream parchment, his name written in green ink in handwriting that had an organic, calligraphic quality unlike anything printed. Mr. H. Potter Cullen, the kitchen counter, the Cullen residence, Forks, Washington. It knows the hyphen, Harry observed. Apparently, Edward said. We should talk about the fact that there's an owl on the counter. Yes. After you open the letter. Harry opened the letter. The owl helped itself to a piece of his cereal with the unapologetic manner of something that considered this fair compensation for services rendered. The letter was 2 pages. Harry read both. Then he set them down on the counter and looked at Edward and said, "They want me in September." "I know. You read it through my eyes as I read it." "Guilty," Edward said. Harry didn't mind. He'd grown up understanding that Edward's gift was always running, that being known was a constant condition of living with his father, and he'd made peace with it early in the specific way that came from knowing the knowing was never used against him. Edward read his mind and kept his counsel and that was a different thing entirely from being watched. "The second page is from Dumbledore," Harry said. "Not the official letter. A personal note." "I saw." Harry picked it up again. "Dear Harry. My name is Albus Dumbledore and I was a friend of your parents. I have been hoping to meet you for some years now, and I hope that Hogwarts can feel to you like the home it has felt to many of your family before you. Your father and mother both walked its halls. I would very much like the opportunity to tell you about them, and about you, in person. A signature, and then a postscript, I understand you have been well looked after. I am glad of it. Harry put the letter down. His face was composed, which was always the flag. Harry composed his face exactly when he was feeling the most. He knew where I was, Harry said. The whole time. Yes, Edward said. Because that was the truth, and Harry would clock a softened version of it immediately. He let me stay in the cupboard. He believed. Edward stopped. Then, more accurately, he made a calculation. He thought you were safer with your mother's family, with blood relatives, because of a magical protection that had formed when your mother died. He prioritized the protection over whether you were being cared for. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's a terrible calculation, he said. Yes. I'm not angry, Harry said, which was true and also not the whole truth, and Edward could hear both things. I understand it logically. But I'm going to remember it. He looked up. When I meet him, I'm going to remember that he knew. That seems fair, Edward said. Harry nodded, once, decisively, in the manner of a person filing something under decided and moving forward. He looked at the owl, which was still eating his cereal. So, he said. When do we go to London? They went the following Saturday. All of them, because the Cullen family had a specific approach to significant events that involved everyone showing up simultaneously, which was either a show of solidarity or mildly overwhelming depending on your perspective, and Harry's perspective was that he'd rather have all of them than none of them. Carlisle and Esme stayed at the hotel with Alice and Jasper. Rosalie and Emmett were on standby because Rosalie had said, I'm not sitting in a hotel room while they take him to a bank, with a specificity of objection that suggested she'd identified a potential threat and intended to physically interpose herself between it and Harry if necessary. Edward and Bella took Harry to Diagon Alley. Finding the entrance was, it turned out, the easiest part. They came to London with the address from the Hogwarts letter, the Leaky Cauldron, 93, Charing Cross Road, and Bella spotted the pub immediately because she'd been looking for exactly the kind of thing that ordinary attention slid off, and Harry walked through the door between his parents and into the noise and low light of a place that smelled of old wood and spilled butterbeer and something else, something underneath, that made the magic in his blood lean forward like a dog catching a scent. Several people in the Leaky Cauldron looked up when they walked in. Then several more. The barman, Tom, an ancient and cheerful individual whose face had the quality of a crumpled map, stopped mid-wipe of the counter and squinted, and his expression went from professional courtesy to something with considerably more weight in it, and he said, slowly, Good Lord. Is that, you're not, are you Harry Potter? Harry Cullen, Harry said. Politely, but without any ambiguity. Tom blinked. He looked at Edward and Bella, who were standing slightly behind Harry with the specific quality of people who were making no move to step in front of him, and then back at Harry. I haven't seen you since your parents used to come in, you know, the Potters. Your father looked just like, I'd like to get to Gringotts before it closes, Harry said, still politely, but he'd moved one step forward and his voice had a quality of finality to it that Tom evidently heard, because he stopped talking about James Potter's hair and came around the counter to show them the back entrance to the alley. Outside, in the narrow brick passageway, Tom tapped the bricks with his wand and the wall opened, and Harry stepped through into Diagon Alley. He stopped. Not from overwhelm, from attention. He stood very still and looked at the street stretching ahead of them, crooked buildings in improbable shades, shop windows displaying objects that moved and glittered and pulsed with magic that he could feel in his blood from 20 feet away, owls in cages and cauldrons stacked and a broom suspended in a window, and 100 people moving through all of it in robes and hats and looking entirely comfortable in a world that the rest of the planet didn't know existed. And they were looking at him. Not everyone. But enough. Word moved fast in small communities, and the Leaky Cauldron had been the starting point. Harry could see it in the double takes, the elbowing, the sudden stillness, and he let them look, because he'd learned from Edward that being watched was just information, and what people revealed when they watched you was worth noting. They're scared of me, Harry said quietly, to Edward. Some of them, Edward agreed. The ones who know what the name means. Not scared of me. No, Edward said. Scared of what they've built you up to be. Of the gap between what they've imagined and the actual person. He looked at his son. Let them close that gap on their own time. Harry nodded. He looked at the street. Then he looked at Bella, who was looking at the crowd with her amber eyes and the particular expression that meant she was processing something she found interesting and had already decided what to do about it. Gringotts, she said. Gringotts, Harry agreed. They walked. The goblin behind the entrance desk looked at Harry's key with an expression that was professionally neutral but contained, for anyone reading carefully, a distinct flicker of something older and more complicated. Harry Potter, the goblin said. Cullen, Harry said, without heat. The goblin looked at him. Its eyes were black and ancient and were performing an assessment that had nothing to do with social pleasantries. Cullen, it repeated. A pause. You'll want to speak with Ragnarok. I was going to ask about my vault, Harry said. Ragnarok will explain the vault. Another pause, longer. And the other things. Edward's hand rested briefly on Harry's shoulder, not steering, just present. They were taken through corridors that went steadily deeper and grew steadily colder, and the goblins they passed stopped to look, which was unusual enough that even Bella noticed and leaned slightly toward Edward, and he gave a small headshake that meant I don't know but I'm listening. At the door to a private office that made the main banking hall look like a waiting room, a goblin called Ragnarok was sitting behind a desk that was covered in documents and looking at Harry with an expression that was, for a goblin, the equivalent of awed. Sit, Ragnarok said. They sat. I will tell you things, Ragnarok said, in the direct manner of someone who found pleasantries actively offensive. Some of them you won't have known. I will tell you them anyway because you have a right to them and because our oath to the Potter family extends to its heirs. His eyes moved to Edward and Bella. Your guardians may hear everything. They're not my guardians, Harry said. They're my parents. Something in Ragnarok's expression shifted. Just slightly. Your parents, he said, may hear everything. The things Ragnarok had to say took 40 minutes and covered, the Potter family vault, which was substantial, the Black family vault, which was considerably more substantial, and to which Harry was heir through his mother's side via a connection that Ragnarok explained with genealogical precision that Edward found genuinely impressive, a third vault that was something Ragnarok referred to as the Legacy Vault, which had been established by the Potters in the event of their deaths and held not just money but documents, objects, and a sealed letter with Harry's name on it in Lily Potter's handwriting. Harry held the letter for a long moment. He didn't open it. Can I take this with me? He asked. It's yours, Ragnarok said. Harry put it in his jacket pocket, carefully, and kept his hand over it for a moment, and nobody said anything about that. The Black Vault was the one that raised eyebrows. Ragnarok laid out the numbers and the nature of the assets and Edward, who was by no means unmoved by large sums of money, revised several of his estimates of Harry's independence substantially upward. Harry listened without expression. The vault is currently in trust, Ragnarok said. Managed by the ministry pending confirmation of your identity and status. When you turn 17, full access, full immediate access, transfers to you with no ministry oversight. He said ministry oversight with the tone of someone referring to an irritating administrative fiction. Until then, you may draw on the Potter Vault freely. The Black Vault allows for emergency access with my personal authorization. What counts as an emergency? Harry asked. I will know one when you describe it to me, Ragnarok said. Harry nodded. What about the third thing you wanted to tell me? Ragnarok looked at him. I said there were things you hadn't known. You mentioned them in that order for a reason. The vault, the Black inheritance, those were context. There's something else. Bella made a small sound that might have been a quiet laugh, very quickly suppressed. Ragnarok leaned forward. His ancient black eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that the goblin clearly hadn't bothered to moderate. Your blood, he said. You are aware that it is unusual. Yes. Goblin accounting tracks more than gold, Ragnak said. We track legacy. Power. The lines of magical inheritance. Your line, the Potter line, was already notable. The Peveril connection, he paused. You are aware of the Peverils? No. You will be. He tapped his desk once. The Peveril line is old. Older than most of what stands in this alley. 3 brothers, 3 objects of enormous power. Your family descends from the youngest brother, who was also the wisest. The wand, the stone, the cloak is in your vault. Harry sat very still. The point, Ragnak said, is that your blood was already exceptional before. He looked at Edward and Bella, and the look was not hostile, but it was measuring. Before it became what it is now. What it is now, there are no words in our ledgers for it. We have had to create new entries. Our seers have not stopped arguing about you for 8 years. He paused. The magical world thinks it knows what you are. It believes you are a symbol of its victory over a dark wizard. It is wrong in almost every important particular. I know, Harry said. Ragnak looked at him for a moment. Then something in the goblin's face settled, some long-held tension released, as if the answer he'd been waiting for, across 8 years of accounts and arguments, had just arrived in the form of an 11-year-old in muggle clothes with eyes like green fire. Good, Ragnak said. They bought the school things after Gringotts. Robes from Madame Malkin's, where 3 other students were being fitted and went very quiet when Harry walked in, and where the fitting witch's hands shook slightly before she composed herself, and books from Flourish and Blots, which Harry moved through at speed because the books were interesting and the staring was less so, and potion ingredients and a telescope and an owl that Harry saw through the window of the Ollery and stopped walking without being able to immediately articulate why. The owl was black. Not brown-black, not dark-feathered black, but an absolute unreflective black, like the spaces between stars. It was sitting at the back of the shop ignoring all the other owls with the manner of something that had made peace with its surroundings by declining to engage with them. That one, Harry said. Bella looked at it. It's very black. Yes. Does it have a name? Harry looked at the owl. The owl turned its head and looked back at him with the rotating focus of its kind, and then, in the specific, rare acknowledgement of an owl that has identified its person, it blinked very slowly, once. Eclipse, Harry said, without knowing exactly why, and it was done. The wand was last. Ollivander's was smaller than the other shops and older in a way that went past cosmetic. The oldness was in the air, in the waiting, in the quality of attention that the shop gave to whoever entered it, as though the shop itself was deciding things. The man who emerged from between the tall shelves had eyes the color of mercury and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had been doing one thing for a very long time and had reached a complete understanding of it. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. I wondered, Ollivander said, if you would come. He came around the counter and stood in front of Harry and looked at him, not the way Tom at the Leaky Cauldron had looked, not with awe or celebrity recognition, but with the precise, technical attention of an expert looking at a problem. Give me your wand hand. Harry held out his right hand. Ollivander took his wrist and turned it gently, examining the veins, and his expression shifted into something carefully neutral. Interesting, he said. People say that a lot, Harry said. I imagine they do. Ollivander released his hand. Your blood there is a resonance in it that I have not encountered before. It will make finding your wand, he paused. Let me rephrase. It will make finding your wand interesting. He started producing boxes. The process took longer than it might have. Wand after wand tried and found wanting, some violently, one producing a shower of sparks that set a shelf on fire briefly before Harry put it out with an absent gesture that made Ollivander go very still. 12 wands, 13, 16, and with each failed match Ollivander went farther back into his shelves and returned looking increasingly like a man confronting a genuinely novel problem, which was clearly a rare condition for him. The 17th wand he placed in Harry's hand without preamble. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said, 11 inches, supple. The moment Harry's fingers closed around it the warmth came, but it wasn't just warmth, it was recognition, the magical equivalent of a key hitting the right lock, and the light that rose from it was gold white and then deepened at the edges to cold blue, the same two colors that Harry's power ran in, and it held for a full 3 seconds before Harry lowered it. Curious, Ollivander said. He was looking at the wand. He was looking at Harry. He was looking at Edward and Bella with an expression that wanted to ask several questions and was working out which ones were answerable. Curious. That wand's brother, he stopped. Well. We shall see. Its brother killed my parents, Harry said. Not dramatically. Just correctly. Ollivander met his eyes. Yes. And the man who held it isn't dead. A pause. The evidence suggests not entirely. Good, Harry said, which was not the answer Ollivander had expected, and which produced a silence in the shop that had a particular texture. I'd rather deal with a living problem than wonder about a dead one. He looked at the wand. I'll take this one. Outside, in the afternoon light of Diagon Alley, with parcels and an owl and a wand and a letter from his dead mother still in his pocket, Harry stood on the cobblestones and was quiet. Bella stood beside him. Not asking. Just there. I'm not afraid, Harry said. I know, she said. Of any of it. The school, the wizarding world, Voldemort, whatever's left of him. He turned to look at her. Is that strange? No, she said. Edward thinks I should be more careful. Edward thinks everyone should be more careful. It's one of his qualities. Harry almost smiled. What do you think? Bella looked at her son, this boy she'd carried out of a cupboard and held through a fever and watched become something the world hadn't made a word for yet, and said, I think being afraid would be a waste of you. Dumbledore found them at 5 o'clock. They'd been in the leaky cauldron for an hour, at a corner table, eating, Harry eating, Edward and Bella maintaining the polite fiction of cups of tea, and going through the book list together when the door opened and the man who walked in was recognizable from his reputation before anything else, in the way that certain people are, the height, the silver beard, the robes that were technically appropriate for the setting and somehow still managed to suggest starlight. He looked across the pub and found Harry immediately, and his face, across that distance, showed something complex and unguarded before the control came down. He came to the table. May I sit? He asked. Harry looked at him. Yes. Edward and Bella were on either side of Harry and neither of them spoke and neither of them moved, and Dumbledore settled into the chair across from Harry with the careful grace of an old man who wanted to convey that he was not a threat, and for a moment they just looked at each other. You look like your father, Dumbledore said. People keep telling me that, Harry said. What did my mother look like? A pause. Something moved across Dumbledore's face. She had your eyes. Exactly. Harry nodded. He looked at the table for a moment and then back up. You knew where I was, Harry said. Dumbledore held his gaze. To his credit, he didn't deflect. Yes. For how long? From the beginning, Dumbledore said. I placed you with your aunt myself. I believed it was the safest. You were wrong, Harry said. Silence. Yes, Dumbledore said, quietly, and there was genuine weight in it, not the performed weight of a man used to being forgiven but the actual weight of someone who had been carrying something sharp for a long time. I was wrong. I don't need an apology, Harry said. I just needed to know that you knew you were wrong. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had several things in it, respect, something that might have been grief, and underneath both of those, carefully managed but present, the quality of a man recalculating. You are not what I expected, Dumbledore said, and it was honest enough that Harry received it without suspicion. What did you expect? Something younger, Dumbledore said. In the ways that matter. He looked at Edward and Bella briefly, and then back at Harry. It seems you have had good people around you. The best, Harry said, and the simplicity of it landed like a fact rather than a declaration. Dumbledore folded his hands on the table. "I would like to speak with you about what's coming," he said. "About Voldemort." "About the prophecy, not today," Harry said. Dumbledore paused. "Harry, I mean it respectfully," Harry said. "I've read your letter. I know you have things to tell me that matter. But today I found out I'm richer than I knew. I met a goblin who was emotionally affected, I found a wand, and I bought an owl." He looked at Dumbledore with clear, calm eyes. "The prophecy will still be a prophecy at Hogwarts. We can talk then. On my terms." Edward, who had been listening to Dumbledore's mind for the entire conversation, observed the exact moment when the old headmaster decided that this boy was going to require a fundamental revision of his entire approach. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Then, slowly, he smiled, and it reached his eyes, and it was different from the controlled warmth he'd been projecting since he sat down. It was a real smile, touched with something rueful. "On your terms," he agreed. "Thank you," Harry said. He picked up his tea. "Tell me about my mother." "Not the prophecy. Not Voldemort. Tell me something she did at school that you actually remember." Dumbledore blinked. Then he settled back in his chair, and the careful political architecture of the conversation dropped, and he said, "She once charmed every clock in the castle to run backwards because she thought Thursday had lasted too long." He paused. "The enchantment was so well executed that it took us 3 days to undo it. She received detention and was entirely unrepentant." Harry laughed. It was full and real and lit up his whole face, and across the table Dumbledore watched it with something that was not quite grief and not quite joy and was probably both. On the walk back to the hotel, with Eclipse in her carrier and the bags over Emmett's enormous relieved shoulders, because Emmett had been restraining himself near the alley entrance for 2 hours and had immediately materialized when they emerged, Harry walked between his parents and was quiet, and the quiet was full rather than empty. "She sounds like she was funny," he said, finally, "about Lily Potter and the backwards clocks." "She sounds like she was extraordinary," Bella said. Harry considered this. The evening was cooling and London was moving around them in its enormous indifferent way, and somewhere in his jacket pocket a letter from his dead mother waited for the right moment to be read. "Good," he said. "I'd rather come from extraordinary." He reached over without looking and took Bella's hand, and she held it, and they walked. Chapter 4, Blood and Stone. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:45, which was enough time to find a compartment, stow his trunk, settle Eclipse's carrier on the rack, and stand at the window watching Edward and Bella on the platform below with the specific quality of someone who was entirely fine and had no intention of pretending otherwise. He'd said goodbye at the barrier, the whole family had come, because of course they had, Emmett approximately the size of the barrier itself, Rosalie in sunglasses that were doing moderate work against the September overcast, Alice vibrating with something that was either vision-related or enthusiasm, possibly both. Bella had held him for a long moment and then let go cleanly, which was the kind of thing only someone who genuinely trusted you could do. Edward had said, "Right. Actually write, not just when something explodes." Harry had said, "I'll write when things explode, and that'll be interesting enough to justify the postage." Edward had looked at him with the expression of a man who was choosing to find this funny and would be examining his anxiety privately later, and Harry had grinned and gone through the barrier. Now the train was filling around him. The compartment had acquired 2 additional occupants, a red-haired boy who'd knocked and asked politely if anywhere was taken, and a girl who'd knocked less than 2 minutes later and asked if they'd seen a toad, which they hadn't, and who had then decided that the toad could wait while she introduced herself as Hermione Granger with the energy of someone who had read every relevant book and intended to make sure everyone knew it. The red-haired boy was Ron Weasley. Harry had heard the name before. Ragnarok, in passing, had mentioned the Weasley family as one of the old wizarding bloodlines, and Dumbledore's letter had mentioned "I hope you will find good friends at Hogwarts," and Harry was prepared to take both of these as low-key endorsements. Within 10 minutes of the train moving he'd decided that Ron was exactly the kind of person he liked, direct, unself-conscious, completely unprepared for someone who didn't react to the name Harry Potter the way he'd expected, which had created a brief recalibration period that Ron had handled by offering Harry a cauldron cake and moving on, and that was, Harry felt, the right approach entirely. Hermione was something else. She was, he searched for the word, relentless, in the way a river was relentless, not because it was trying to overwhelm anything but because it was simply and completely committed to moving forward. She was extraordinarily well-read and she didn't entirely know what to do with the fact that Harry matched her on about half the references she made and exceeded her on the others, and he could watch her recalibrate in real time, which he found engaging. "You don't talk like an 11-year-old, she told him, somewhere past Bristol. "You don't either," he said. She considered this. "Fair. Then, your eyes are an unusual color." "Yes. There's something about you that's," she frowned with the focus of someone used to identifying things. "Different." "Yes," he said again. She waited for more. He didn't provide it. She made a note, he could tell, not literally, she didn't have a notebook out, but the mental equivalent, the small click of a thing filed for later review. He liked her immediately for not pressing it. Ron, meanwhile, had fallen asleep against the window. The castle, when it appeared over the lake in the darkness, made everyone go quiet. Harry went quiet too, but for different reasons than the others. The others were awed by the lights and the towers and the sheer physical fact of it. Harry was quiet because of what he could feel. The magic in Hogwarts was ancient and layered and enormous, the way Diagon Alley had been a stream to this ocean, and when the boats moved across the Black Lake toward it his blood responded like a compass finding north. The two frequencies in him, the warm and the cold, the born and the made, both leaned toward it simultaneously. He let them. The sorting was, predictably, more eventful than he'd expected. The hat went onto his head and found him immediately, the way the wand had found him, that quality of contact between one old thing and one new but deep thing, and he heard its voice clear and low, "Well. I haven't felt anything like this in 1,000 years, and I have a reasonable sample size." "Sort me," Harry thought back. "You could go anywhere." That's not flattery, that's assessment. The courage is obvious. The intelligence is exceptional. The ambition, yes, there it is, you want things, Harry Cullen, and you are going to take them. "I know," he said. "Sort me somewhere useful." Useful. A pause. "Not where your parents were. Not for legacy." "I don't need a legacy," Harry thought. "I need to learn." "Gryffindor," said the hat, with the satisfaction of something that had been given a problem worth solving. "Though if you'd said anything other than that, I might have argued." "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry moved to it with the absence of self-consciousness that came from having spent years as the most anomalous thing in any room and having simply gotten used to it. He sat down. People were looking at him from every table, the famous scar, the famous name, the famous story, and he looked back at all of them without performance, just with the steady, even attention of someone taking inventory. At the staff table, a man in a purple turban was watching him. Harry looked at him for long enough to note the quality of the attention, not curious, not professionally interested, but something beneath both of those, something slightly frantic in its careful concealment, and filed it. Hogwarts, in the weeks that followed, was exactly what Harry had wanted and several things he hadn't anticipated. What he'd wanted was the magic, the formal instruction, the framework, the names for things he'd been doing by instinct for years. He'd practiced wandless since before he had a wand, and having one now was like switching from a knife to a surgical instrument, and the precision it allowed was deeply satisfying to him. He moved through the first-year curriculum at a pace that concerned exactly two people, Professor McGonagall, who watched him transfigure a matchstick to a needle in 30 seconds on the first day and responded by staying after class to hand him a third-year text without comment, and Professor Flitwick, who fell off his pile of books in delight when Harry's first Wingardium Leviosa lifted the feather to the ceiling and held it there and rotated it slowly. What he hadn't anticipated was the quality of magic that was already in him. He'd known it was there. He'd known it was unusual. What he hadn't known, what 3 years of family training and Carlyle's careful tests hadn't fully shown him, was how it looked from the outside, from the perspective of people who taught magic for a living. McGonagall's expression the first time she watched him cast a nonverbal protego in defense against the dark arts, the shield rising fully formed, gold-white and slightly cool at the edges in a way no first-year shield had any business being, was the expression of a woman processing significant new information and deciding what to do with it. "Potter," said Professor Quirrell, in defense against the dark arts, with a stammer that Harry had already identified as intermittent rather than consistent, which was interesting. "Cullen," Harry said. A pause. "Why yes. C. Cullen. Would you demonstrate the shield charm for the class?" Harry stood up from his desk. He raised his wand. The shield came up between him and the room with the ease of breathing, and it was larger than he'd intended, expanding outward in a 5-foot radius that covered not just Harry but Ron and Hermione on either side of him as well, and it had the cold blue quality at its edges that happened when he drew on the second thing in him, and everyone in the room went very quiet. Quirrell's stammer disappeared entirely for a moment. "Impressive," he said, smoothly, and then it returned. Very good, Mr. C. Cullen." Harry lowered the shield and sat down and said nothing. But he looked at Quirrell and Quirrell looked at him, and for 1 second the frantic quality beneath the man's careful surface was entirely visible. That evening he wrote to Edward. "Professor Quirrell is interesting. Not the way a teacher is interesting. Right back." The reply came with Eclipse 2 mornings later. Edward's letter was 3 sentences, "I know. I've been looking into it. Don't do anything alone." Harry read it twice. He appreciated the brevity, the completeness of it, the absence of any instruction to tell a teacher or trust in authority. Edward had listened to enough human minds across a century to have a realistic view of which instructions were genuinely useful. He showed Hermione and Ron the letter, because he'd told them about his family, not everything, but enough. "They'd both accepted my parents aren't exactly normal with varying degrees of questions, Ron asking mostly about the vampire elements when they came out and Hermione asking for reading recommendations, which was completely on brand, and he valued their perspectives." "Don't do anything alone," Hermione read. "What does that mean?" "It means he knows something about Quirrell," Ron said. "He was eating toast with the focus of someone who liked both the eating and the mystery. And it means we're doing something. Probably something we shouldn't. Eventually," Harry said. "What are we waiting for?" "More information." He reached for Hermione's quill and made a note on the edge of his parchment. "And I want to know what's under the trapdoor on the 3rd floor." Both of them looked at him. "The dog," he said. "The giant 3-headed dog that's in the off-limits corridor. It's guarding something." "How do you know there's a dog?" Hermione asked. "I can smell it from the 2nd floor, Harry said. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Made the mental filing click. "Right," she said. "The different thing." "The different thing," he agreed. November passed, December came, and the magical world continued its process of deciding what to think about Harry Cullen. The Slytherins had made one attempt at hierarchy establishment in the 2nd week. A boy named Draco Malfoy, pale and precise and carrying the specific confidence of someone who had been told all his life that his opinion was important, had approached Harry in the corridor outside potions and offered, with studied casualness, to help him understand how things worked here. Harry had looked at him. "I already understand how things work," Harry had said. "Your family isn't wizarding," Malfoy had said, with the precise pause of someone deploying a word as a weapon. "There are things about our world that, my family," Harry said, "is older than your family and considerably more interesting. If you want to talk to me, Malfoy, talk to me. The social architecture isn't necessary." Malfoy had stared at him. The friends behind him, Crabbe and Goyle, neither of whom had the quality of genuine agency, had stared too. "You're strange," Malfoy had said, finally, and Harry was fairly certain he hadn't meant it as an insult. "Yes," Harry said. He'd kept walking. After that the Slytherins had developed a collective policy of watchful distance, which Harry found perfectly agreeable. Snape was something else entirely. Potions on Fridays, Stone Dungeon, 40 students in stifling proximity, the particular atmosphere that formed when a room full of 11-year-olds was simultaneously trying to impress a teacher who showed no sign of being impressible. Snape moved through the classroom like a cold front, black robes, voice like a blade, and when he stopped behind Harry's workstation on the third class and looked at Harry's potion, which was correct, better than correct, a slightly deeper purple than the book called for because Harry had understood intuitively that the instructions were slightly underpowered for the ambient humidity of the dungeons and had adjusted, his expression was the most complex thing Harry had seen on a teacher's face. So far. Snape looked at the potion for a long time. "You adjusted the daisy root ratio," he said. "The dungeons are damp," Harry said. "The moisture affects the extraction rate." Another pause. "That's third-year theory." It seemed obvious. Snape's eyes moved from the potion to Harry's face, and the look he gave him was one that Harry filed carefully, not hostile, exactly, but not the veiled dislike he'd pointed at Ron or the professional indifference he directed at most students. It was the look of someone who had been prepared for one thing and received another entirely, and was working out what that meant. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, which clearly cost him something, and moved on. The game was on a Tuesday in December. Not Quidditch. Harry had made the Gryffindor Quidditch team in October, to Wood's overwhelming relief and McGonagall's carefully concealed satisfaction, but the larger game, the one that had been running since September, the one about Quirrell and the third-floor corridor and the thing being guarded. Harry had worked it out in pieces, the way you worked out a lock you couldn't see directly, by feeling around its edges. The three-headed dog, Fluffy, apparently, which was the most Hagrid name possible for a thing that large, was guarding a trapdoor. Hagrid had let slip something about Gringotts and a high-security vault in September. In November, he'd mentioned Nicholas Flamel in a way that suggested the name was connected to the thing being protected. Harry had found Flamel in notable alchemical achievements of the 15th century in the library and understood immediately, the Philosopher's Stone. And Quirrell wanted it. Harry was certain of this with the particular certainty that came not from logic alone but from the full-body conviction of the second thing in him, the cold thing, which had been telling him since September that the defense professor was not what he appeared. He didn't push the information prematurely. He gathered. He waited. He wrote to Edward, who wrote back more specific information about Quirrell's recent history, a sabbatical in Albania, a noticeable personality shift on return, and said, in the last letter, not just Quirrell. The other thing is there too. Be very careful. Harry read the other thing is there too and understood what Edward meant and was not afraid. He told Ron and Hermione. Voldemort, Hermione said. Part of him, Harry said. Something left over. Edward thinks it's some kind of, he used the word fragment. Ron had gone slightly pale. I know, Harry said. That's why we're going tonight and not waiting for it to move. Going where, exactly? Hermione asked, though her expression was the expression of someone who already knew and was deciding whether to argue. Through the trapdoor, Harry said. The three-headed dog trapdoor. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back. She had known him for 3 months and she had the information on what he was, the partial information, the enough information, and she was running the calculation of whether his confidence was the arrogance of a boy who hadn't been taught to be afraid of the right things, or the assurance of someone who had correct data about his own capabilities. The dog will be asleep, Harry said. There's music, I heard it last week when I was near the door. When someone plays music it sleeps. I have a flute. You have a, Harry, where did you get a flute? Hagrid. He gave it to me months ago. He gives everyone things. Hermione pressed her fingers to her forehead. Then, I'm coming. Ron, who had already gotten up from the table, obviously. The third-floor corridor at midnight smelled of dog and old stone and the specific charged quality of strong magic at close range. Fluffy was asleep before they reached the door. Harry was playing the flute by the time they eased the door open, a simple, steady melody, nothing elegant, enough, and the dog's 3 heads were down, its enormous sides rising and falling with the deep, rolling breaths of something big in deep sleep. The trapdoor was open beneath one of its paws. Harry went first. The drop was longer than it looked and they landed on a soft mass of plant that moved immediately, tendrils winding around Harry's ankles. "Devil's snare," Hermione said, and she was already moving, her wand up, a soft blue-white light blossoming from the tip that made the plant recoil and release. She moved it across the floor with the unhurried focus of someone doing precisely what she prepared for, and the plant retreated, and they were standing in a chamber with stone walls and a narrow passage onward. Harry looked at her. "Excellent," he said, and meant it. "I know," she said, and meant that too. The rooms came one after another, winged keys on broomsticks, which Ron identified, and they navigated with practiced ease, Harry pulling the right key from the air on a Firebolt-quality dive that left the others looking upward with slightly different expressions on their faces, a chess game that Ron handled with the specific, unconscious brilliance of someone who had grown up treating it as a language rather than a game, a logic puzzle that Hermione solved in under a minute, and then, at the end, a room with a door and the knowledge on the other side of it. Harry looked at both of them. "I go in," he said. "You go back." "Harry," Ron started. "I need you to go back and tell McGonagall. Not to help me, I don't need help with what's in there. I need her to know what's happened so the stone can be removed." He held Ron's eyes. "This is how we make sure it's actually safe after. Can you do that?" Ron looked at him for a moment with an expression that had several complicated things in it, the desire to argue, the recognition that the reasoning was sound, and underneath both of those, the specific look of someone who had decided to trust a person based not on hope but on evidence. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." Hermione hugged Harry, quickly, the way she did things, decisively and without ceremony, and then they went, and Harry opened the door. The mirror of Eriste stood against the far wall of the room. Quirrell stood in front of it. He turned when Harry entered, and there was no stammer when he spoke. "I wondered when you'd come," Quirrell said. "I expected you weeks ago, honestly." "I was waiting for you to move," Harry said. He looked at the mirror, then at Quirrell. "You couldn't get the stone out of the mirror. You've been here 3 times, I could smell it. But the enchantment was stopping you." Quirrell looked at him with something that was not quite respect and not quite fear, occupying the specific space between them. "Dumbledore's enchantment, yes. Only someone who wants the stone but not to use it can retrieve it." He tilted his head. "The master thought you might be able to do it." "Did he?" "He's very interested in you," Quirrell said, and the voice that came out with those words was not entirely Quirrell's voice, the same way a puppet's voice was not entirely its own. "He has been for 10 years. Harry looked at the back of Quirrell's head, where the turban sat, where the fragment of something that should have been dead resided in the living body of a man who had made a terrible choice in Albania. "Tell him I know," Harry said. Quirrell lifted his wand. The spell he cast was fast and professional, Harry gave him credit for that. Quirrell was not a weak wizard, and Harry raised his right hand and the shield was up before the curse was halfway across the room, and it hit the surface of it and redirected cleanly into the ceiling. The cold blue quality at the shield's edges was very bright in the dark of the room. Quirrell's eyes widened. He cast again, something darker this time, and Harry let the shield expand and stepped forward through it, forward, toward Quirrell, which was not the expected response to an incoming curse and which took Quirrell 3 full seconds to respond to, and in 3 seconds Harry had crossed half the room. "The master said you would run," Quirrell said, and there was something slightly desperate in the control of it now. "The master was working with old information," Harry said. He was 5 feet away. He could feel the thing on the back of Quirrell's head, feel it the way he felt wrongness in general, with the cold sense that was venom deep and old, something that recognized ancient dark power as a foreign body the same way blood recognized infection. And beneath the Quirrell thing he could feel what had killed his parents, a fragment of a soul that should not have survived, that had been clinging to the edge of existence for a decade. And it knew him. He could feel that too, the flinching recognition, the thing that had tried to end him at 1 year old touching the edge of what he'd become and pulling back. The stone, Quirrell said, stepping sideways toward the mirror. Get me the stone, and the master will let you walk away. I don't need the master's permission to walk anywhere, Harry said. He looked at the mirror. The mirror of Eriste showed him what he wanted most. He'd expected, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. His parents, maybe. The Cullens. Something personal, something that told him about the inside of his own heart in the way the great magical objects tended to. The mirror showed him standing exactly where he was standing. With a small stone in his left hand. He felt the weight of it appear in his palm before he consciously reached for it. The stone was warm against his skin. Not hot, warm, the specific warmth of an object that had been imbued with so much life-adjacent magic that it carried the echo of it. He looked at it for a single second. Then he put it in his pocket. Quirrell made a sound and lunged. His hands caught Harry's forearm. What happened next was something Harry would spend a significant amount of time afterward trying to accurately describe, to Edward, to Carlisle, to Dumbledore, to the various parties who would want an account. The simplest version was, Quirrell touched him and couldn't hold on. The slightly more accurate version was, the magic venom thing in Harry's blood, which had been running cold and alert since he entered the room, responded to the contact with the dark fragment on Quirrell's skin like an immune response to a pathogen. Not aggressive. Just absolute. The cold blue light came up through Harry's skin at every point of contact and Quirrell recoiled as if burned, his hands blistering visibly, and the thing on the back of his head made a sound that was very old and very wrong and nothing like a human voice. No, said the fragment. No. What are you, something new, Harry said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was simply and completely present, the way he'd learned to be present in the yard and forks with his parents watching, the way he'd learned to be present in every room that tested him, fully occupying the specific thing that he was without apology and without reduction. Quirrell reached for him again, desperate now, the fragment driving, the man almost secondary, and Harry caught his wrist. The light went through Quirrell's entire body. It lasted 4 seconds. Then Quirrell crumpled. The room was very quiet. Harry stood over Quirrell's unconscious form, alive, breathing, but the turban had come loose and the back of his head was undamaged, the dark magic simply gone, evicted as completely as the devil's snare had been evicted from the chamber above, and looked at his own hands. They were cold bright for a moment and then they were just hands. He reached into his pocket. The stone was still there. He set it carefully on the floor in front of the mirror of Eriste and looked at his reflection in the glass and the reflection looked back and they understood each other. He left the stone on the floor, because it didn't belong to him and he didn't want it. Dumbledore arrived 4 minutes later. He stood in the doorway and looked at the scene, Quirrell unconscious, the stone on the floor, Harry standing in the middle of the room with his arms at his sides and his expression the one he had when he'd done something and was entirely clear-eyed about it. And for a long moment the headmaster was simply, completely still. Are you hurt? He asked. No. Quirrell. Alive. What was on him is gone. I'm not certain where it went. Dumbledore came into the room. He crouched beside Quirrell, checked his pulse, examined the blistered hands with the careful attention of someone looking for something specific, and straightened. The fragment has separated, he said, half to himself. Driven out by the contact with, he looked at Harry. Your hands. Yes. You could have just handed him the stone and walked out, Dumbledore said. He couldn't have followed you for long. He would have tried again, Harry said. And next time with less warning. I'd rather it's done. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You're 11 years old. Nearly 12, Harry said, because the birthday was in July. Then, without particular emphasis, you said you'd tell me about the prophecy. At school. On my terms. This is still school, Dumbledore said, with a dryness that acknowledged several things at once. "I know," Harry said. "Let's sit down." They sat on the floor of the chamber, in the irregular light of the mirror of Ariste, and Dumbledore told him the real shape of it, the prophecy and what it meant, the connection between Harry and Voldemort, the fragment that had been driven out tonight and the larger question of whether it was the last. Harry listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions when Dumbledore finished: how many more pieces of him are there, and, does he know what I am? Dumbledore answered both honestly. He didn't know the number. And no, Voldemort had known what Harry was at 11 months old, and he didn't know what Harry was now. "Good," Harry said. "Let's keep it that way until it matters." Dumbledore looked at the boy in front of him, this strange, clear-eyed child who had just expelled a fragment of the darkest wizard of the century from a possessed man's body by touching him, who had left an immortality-granting stone on the floor because he didn't want it, who had sat down on a dungeon floor to discuss prophecy with the complete composure of someone scheduling a meeting. "Your parents," Dumbledore said, quietly. "Both sets. Would be very proud of you." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said, and it wasn't arrogance, it was just truth, the particular truth of someone who had been loved enough to know what it looked like. He reached into his jacket pocket, the one he always reached for, and for a second Dumbledore thought he was going to produce something from it, but Harry just let his hand rest there, over the letter that Lily Potter had written to her son and that Harry still carried everywhere, still sealed, still waiting for the right moment. He hadn't opened it yet. He would. When he was ready. "I need to write to my father," Harry said, removing his hand from his pocket. He stood up. "He told me not to do anything alone." "You weren't alone," Dumbledore said. "Your friends, I sent them back." Harry looked down at him with the particular expression, not unkind, completely honest, that he'd been perfecting for 11 years. "Edward will know that. He will want a full account." "He sounds formidable," Dumbledore said. "He is," Harry said. "They all are." He started toward the door. Then he paused, without turning. "Professor. The stone should be destroyed. Not moved. Destroyed." Dumbledore looked at the stone on the floor in front of the mirror. "Yes," he said, quietly. "I believe you're right. And Quirrell should get proper help," Harry added. "Not prison. He made a terrible choice but the thing in him made it worse. That's worth factoring in." He left without waiting for an answer. The walk back through the chambers was easy now, Devil's Snare quiet, the winged keys back in the air, the chess pieces still, the logic room clear, and Harry moved through all of it at a steady, unhurried pace, and Eclipse found him somehow in the third-floor corridor, landing on his shoulder from an unknown direction and clacking her beak once against his ear in the manner of an owl who had been worried. "I'm fine," Harry told her. She clacked again, unconvinced. "I'll write the letter now," he said. "Happy?" She settled her feathers and rode his shoulder down the corridor and Harry started composing the letter to Edward in his head, the way he always did, beginning with the things Edward would most want to know and then the things he'd want to know second, and somewhere in the middle of this composition he found himself thinking about Lily Potter and backwards clocks and the letter he still hadn't opened, and he made a decision, there in the corridor, that the right moment was the summer, when he was home. When he was home. He said it internally and felt the weight of it, good weight, grounded weight, and turned it over once just to feel how completely it was true. Home. Chapter 5, The Volturi Come Summer in Forks arrived the way it always did, reluctantly, the rain stepping back by degrees rather than stopping, the sky lightening from gray to a pale silver blue that passed for sunshine in western Washington. The trees dripped for 2 weeks after the last real rain. The road steamed slightly in the mornings. Locals emerged from their houses with the blinking, slightly suspicious energy of people who weren't entirely sure the good weather would hold. Harry had been home for 3 weeks and he was deeply, structurally happy about it. Not in an exclamatory way, happiness for Harry tended to run quiet, a steadiness in how he moved through the house, the ease with which he occupied space that he'd learned over years was genuinely his. He was in the kitchen at 6 every morning before anyone else came down. He ran in the woods with Edward at 7. He spent afternoons in Carlisle's study working through the reading Dumbledore had sent, a second-year curriculum with several additions that were technically third and fourth-year material and which Harry had thanked Dumbledore for in his reply letter with a directness that had apparently made the headmaster smile, according to Alice, who had been watching. He'd opened Lily's letter. He hadn't told anyone he was going to do it, which meant that the whole family knew within approximately 4 minutes, Alice from the vision, Edward from the emotional reverb in Harry's thoughts, Bella from simply paying attention, and they had all, without discussion, arranged themselves elsewhere in the house and given him the kitchen table and the morning light and the privacy of a thing done without witnesses. He'd come out an hour later and made himself toast and said nothing specific, and nobody asked. What they observed was that he seemed lighter, somehow, and that he went to find Bella afterward and sat with her in the garden for a long time, and that he laughed once at something she said with the full laugh, the real one, and that was enough. He'd said to Edward, once, 3 days after, she was funny. Like you said. And she knew what she was doing, sending me to Petunia. She thought it was the only way. She was wrong but she was trying. A pause. And she told me about my dad. The real version, not the story version. Was it good? Edward had asked. He was annoying, Harry had said, with some affection. Really genuinely annoying. She said she didn't like him for years. What changed her mind? He grew up. Harry had looked at the window. She said he grew up. Alice found Edward on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of June. Edward was in the garage with Rosalie, not working on anything, which meant they'd been talking, which meant one of them had something to say that required the privacy of an oil-stained floor and a car between them and the rest of the house, and Alice appeared in the doorway with her expression doing the specific thing it did when she'd seen something she'd been dreading and was deciding how to present it. They sent someone ahead, she said. 3 days out. Maybe 4. Edward set down the wrench he'd been holding. Rosalie straightened up from where she'd been leaning against the car. How many? Edward asked. 2, Alice said. Chelsea and Dimitri. She paused. They're not coming to fight. Chelsea's presence means they want to negotiate, or at least appear to. Dimitri's there because Arrow wants eyes that can track, wants to know exactly what Harry is before Arrow decides what comes next. He already knows what Harry is, Rosalie said. He knows what his informants have told him. He wants direct observation. And if direct observation tells him more than the informants did? Rosalie asked. Alice looked at her steadily. Then we're in a more complicated situation. Edward moved toward the door. Tell Carlisle first, Alice said. And then, I know, Edward said. He found Harry in the backyard. This wasn't a surprise. Harry spent most of his mornings outside in the summer, the way he'd spent them since age 5, and the progression of what he did out there had tracked his development with a kind of perfect fidelity, the leaf spirals, the pine cone stopping, the heat-cold transitions, and now, at 11 going on 12, something considerably more involved. He was currently standing in the center of the yard with his eyes closed and his arms loose at his sides and approximately 24 objects suspended in a wide orbit around him at varying heights and distances. The pine cones were there, and several larger rocks, and a length of chain from the garage that he'd asked Emmett for and Emmett had provided without asking why because he'd learned that Harry's experimental phases were best facilitated rather than interrogated. They were all moving. Not uniformly. Each object had its own speed and trajectory, and Harry was managing all of them simultaneously, and the air around him had the shimmering heat distortion quality that meant he was drawing on both registers. His heartbeat was perfectly steady. Edward watched for a moment. Then, Harry. Harry opened his eyes. The objects settled, gently, each one, nothing dropped, nothing rushed. 24, Harry said, before Edward could ask. Yesterday was 20. The chain's harder than the rocks because it flexes. I need to talk to you, Edward said. Come inside. Harry looked at him. He read something in Edward's face, not alarm, not emergency, but the specific quality of managed gravity that Edward had when a significant thing required a measured conversation, and he came inside without pressing for the information immediately, which was itself a kind of maturity, the knowledge that the next 3 minutes would produce what the next 30 seconds of pushing would not. They sat at the kitchen table. Carlyle was already there. Bella arrived a moment after, from upstairs, with the silence of someone who'd been told. Harry looked at all of them and said, "The Volturi." "Yes," Carlyle said. "Alice said they were coming in a few years," Harry said. "Last summer." "We thought we had more time," Edward said. "The magical community's documentation of you moved faster than Alice anticipated. Once you were formally enrolled at Hogwarts, the information existed in a form that Arrow's contacts could access." Harry put his elbows on the table. He thought. "Chelsea and Dimitri," Carlyle said. "Chelsea has the ability to manipulate emotional bonds, she strengthens or severs the ties between people, which is how the Volturi maintain loyalty. Dimitri is a tracker. Exceptional. The best they have." "What does Chelsea being here mean?" Harry asked. "They want an assessment," Carlyle said. "If they intended direct action, they'd send Felix and someone more combat-oriented. Chelsea's presence is, it's diplomatic, in the Volturi's framework. They want to see you and report back. And Dimitri's there to know exactly what I am so Arrow can make a better decision later," Harry said. "Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then, can she affect me?" "Chelsea." "The bond manipulation." Carlyle and Edward exchanged a look. "We don't know," Carlyle said. "Your bonds are, the magical dimension of your psychology is not something Chelsea has encountered before. It's possible her ability would interact with it unpredictably. Or not work at all," Harry said. "Not hopefully. Just as a possibility worth noting." "Or not work at all," Carlyle agreed. "She'll try," Bella said, from across the table. She was looking at Harry with the focused calm she had when she'd already decided what she was going to do and was simply waiting for the situation to reach the point where she could do it. "She'll try to loosen what you have with us. That's the first move, make the asset feel less attached, more acquirable." Harry looked at his mother. He held her gaze for a moment. "That's not going to work," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He nodded. "I want to be there for the conversation. The whole conversation." "Of course," Edward said. Harry looked at him. "I'm not asking for permission." "I know," Edward said. "I'm saying of course because you should be. It concerns you most directly." Another look. Then the ghost of a smile. "Okay." "And Harry," Edward waited until Harry was fully attending. "Chelsea and Dimitri are not the actual threat. They're the first move. The question isn't how this meeting goes. The question is what Arrow does with what they bring back." "I know," Harry said. He looked at the table, then back up. "So I need to make sure what they bring back isn't just a report about what I can do. I need them to bring back something that makes Arrow recalculate whether acquiring me is worth the cost." Carlyle looked at him. Edward looked at him. Bella, who had been looking at him the whole time, looked at him with an expression that was specific and quiet and had pride in it. "Yes," Edward said. "Exactly that." "Good," Harry said, and stood up. "I've got 3 days. I'm going back outside." They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. The day was overcast, which was good for everyone's comfort, and the house had been settled into the particular configuration of a family that was simultaneously completely normal and completely prepared, which was a Cullen specialty. Esme had arranged tea because Esme arranged tea for every meeting regardless of whether anyone present could drink it, and Emmett was sitting in the living room with his arms folded projecting the specific quality of a very large person who was at rest and intended to remain at rest and was communicating this as information. Harry was at the kitchen table with a book when they knocked. He didn't look up when Carlyle opened the door. He turned a page. He let them come into the house and adjust to the house and read the house, which was exactly as designed, warm, inhabited, domestic, the smell of real life and real habitation, and underneath it the particular layered quality of a vampire family's home that had something else in it, something that didn't fit the category neatly. Something that was currently in the kitchen turning a page. Carlyle brought them through. Chelsea was striking in the way that most Volturi vampires were striking, perfected and cool, her face carrying the particular composed beauty of something that had been still for a very long time. She moved with the deliberateness of someone who was used to being the most strategically significant person in every room she entered. Her eyes were red. Dimitri was taller, quieter, and had the focused stillness of a hunting animal entirely at rest, the kind of stillness that was itself a form of activity. His attention, when it landed on Harry, had a quality like a hand taking a measurement. Harry turned another page. "Harry," Carlyle said. He looked up. He looked at Chelsea, then at Dimitri, with the even unhurried attention he gave everything, and he said, "Hello." Chelsea's smile was precise and warm and entirely professional. "Harry. I've heard so much about you." "I've heard some things about you too," Harry said. A brief pause. Chelsea's smile stayed exactly where it was, which itself was a kind of tell. "All good, I hope." "Informative," Harry said, which was not a reassurance, and which Chelsea heard correctly, because her eyes moved to Carlyle with a fractional recalibration. They sat. All of them, the full family arranged in the living room with the naturalness of a group that actually lived together, which was the whole point. Harry took the armchair nearest the door, not cornered, not defensive, simply positioned, and tucked one leg under himself and set the book on the arm and looked at Chelsea with the full steady attention of someone prepared to have a conversation. Chelsea looked back. Harry felt it when she tried, the bond pressure, the precise manipulative touch of her gift reaching toward the connective tissue of his attachment to his family. It was subtle, professional, the kind of thing that would be completely invisible to a normal vampire or human. It reached toward the warmth of his connection to Bella and tried to put a question mark against it. It met the magic. Not a shield, Harry didn't raise a shield, because Edward had said don't lead with it. What it met was simply the nature of what the magic venom bond was, which was a thing that had been threaded through every cell in his body for 7 years and was not emotional in the way Chelsea's gift operated on emotions. It was biological. It was structural. It was the same as trying to loosen someone's attachment to their own nervous system. Chelsea's expression didn't change. She was too good for that. But her gift withdrew. "Arrow would very much like to meet you," Chelsea said. "He has followed your story with great interest." "I'm sure he has," Harry said. "He believes you represent something unprecedented," she continued. "Something that deserves proper understanding. Proper recognition. From the Volturi," Harry said. "From those best positioned to understand what you are." Harry looked at her calmly. "What do you think I am?" A pause. Chelsea wasn't used to being asked for her own opinion in these meetings, she was used to delivering arrows. "I think you're extraordinary," she said. "That's kind," Harry said. "But it's not an answer." Dimitri spoke for the first time. His voice was measured and direct, the voice of a professional who found the social performance of these meetings mildly tedious. "You're something that doesn't fit existing categories," he said. "Human. Vampire. Magical. All three and none of them exactly. And what does Arrow want with something that doesn't fit existing categories?" Harry asked. "To understand it," Chelsea said, smoothly. "The Volturi maintain order in our world, in both our worlds, as it appears. Something unprecedented is by definition a risk to that order until it's understood. That's one framing," Harry said. "Another framing is that I'm an 11-year-old child and Arrow wants to add me to his collection." The silence that followed had a specific temperature. Emmett, in his chair, made a small sound that was the world's most restrained laugh. Chelsea held Harry's gaze. The composed warmth had recalibrated into something cooler and more genuine. Arrow does not. I know what Jane can do, Harry said. I know what Alec can do. I know the categories of gifts that Arrow finds most useful and why, and I know the history of how the Volturi Guard has been assembled. He said it without heat, without threat, just as information laid clearly on a table. I'm not a category of gift. I'm not a recruit. I'm not a risk to any order worth maintaining. He tilted his head slightly. You should tell Arrow that. Chelsea looked at him for a long moment. Then her eyes moved, briefly, just briefly, to Bella, and Harry saw her recalibrate from the boy to the mother, looking for the leverage point, the way a locksmith looks at a new lock. Bella met Chelsea's gaze and smiled, and the smile was warm and entirely terrible in its completeness. Don't, Bella said, pleasantly. Chelsea looked away. Dimitri had been very still through all of this. Now he spoke again, and Harry could hear something in his voice that was, possibly, the most honest thing in the room so far. You're not afraid of us, he said. Not an accusation. An observation. No, Harry said. The family, perhaps, Dimitri said. But not you. Should I be? Harry asked. Specifically, concretely, give me a reason. Dimitri looked at him. The tracker's gift was running, Harry could feel it the way he felt Chelsea's gift, as a thing with a texture and a direction, and Dimitri was taking a very precise reading, the kind that would allow him to find Harry anywhere on the planet regardless of distance or intervening obstacles. You're mapping me, Harry said. Dimitri paused. The tracking, Harry said. I can feel it. You're taking a reading. Don't. I'm simply, Dimitri. Harry said his name with the same flat, complete authority he'd said no to Quirrell. Don't. Dimitri stopped. He'd been doing this for centuries, and in that time exactly no one had told him to stop mid-track, because no one could feel when he was doing it. The expression on his face was, for the first time, something genuinely unguarded. How, he said. Both of my natures can feel it differently, Harry said. My magic feels the intent. The venom in my blood feels the mechanism. Between the two I know what you're doing before you've finished doing it. He paused. I'm not going to hurt you for trying. But I'd like you to stop. Dimitri looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Edward. Edward's face was the face of a man holding completely still. He's telling the truth, Dimitri said. He always does, Edward said. Harry unfolded his leg from under him and sat forward. He looked at Chelsea. I want to tell you what to take back to Arrow, he said. The actual message, not the observed report. Will you deliver it? Chelsea looked at him with the eyes of someone who had come to deliver a message and was now receiving one, and who had the self-possession to recognize the difference. Yes. Tell him I know what he's building, Harry said. Tell him I understand the logic of it, the collection, the security through monopoly on power, the way the Volturi order functions. I understand it and I don't want to dismantle it. A pause. I have no interest in his throne and no interest in being brought to Volterra. My existence doesn't threaten his order unless he makes it a threat. If he comes after me or my family, I'll make his order very difficult to maintain. He held Chelsea's gaze. That's not a threat from a child who doesn't know what he's threatening. That's an accurate assessment of costs. The room was very quiet. He'll want to verify that himself, Chelsea said. He can want whatever he likes, Harry said. Tell him anyway. They left in the early evening, Chelsea moving through the door with the composed grace of someone who had a great deal to think about, Dimitri pausing at the threshold and looking back at Harry with an expression that was somewhere between professional assessment and something more personal. The magical world knows you as the boy who lived, Dimitri said. I know, Harry said. What do you want the Volturi to know you as? Harry looked at him. He thought about it honestly, because Dimitri had asked it honestly. Cullen, he said. Just that. That's enough. Dimitri nodded, once, and then he was gone. The family stood in the living room for a moment in the aftermath. Emmett broke the silence first, which was traditional. The part where you told Dimitri to stop tracking you, Emmett said. And he actually stopped. He was being rude, Harry said. He's never stopped mid-track for anyone. Ever. In 500 years. He stopped for me, Harry said, with a complete absence of self-congratulation. It was simply what had happened. Emmett stared at him. Then he turned to Edward with the expression of a man who has won a bet with the universe. I told you, Emmett said. I told you when he was 7 and stopped 3 pine cones, yes, Edward said, tiredly. I said, I remember what you said, Edward said. We all remember. I just want it on record, Emmett, Rosalie said, from the doorway. He stopped. Harry was looking at Edward, and the look had something tentative in it for the first time all afternoon, something that was, under all the extraordinary competence of the afternoon, still 11 years old. Did I do it right? He asked. The message. Was it the right call? Edward looked at his son. He thought about everything that had happened in the last 3 hours, the way Harry had sat with a book while 2 of the most dangerous Volturi operatives walked in, the way he'd felt Chelsea's gift and let it fail without reacting, the way he'd told Dimitri to stop and Dimitri had, the message delivered with the precision of someone who had thought very carefully about exactly which words carried the right weight. Yes, Edward said. It was exactly right. Arrow won't leave it, Harry said. No. He won't. Edward came and sat beside him on the arm of the couch. But you've changed the calculation. Before today, he had a report. Now he has a message. A message requires a response, and a response requires deciding what you actually want, and Arrow deciding what he actually wants in the context of what you actually are. He paused. That buys time. Maybe years. And in years, Harry said. In years, you'll be older, Bella said, from across the room. And better. And the calculation gets harder for him every year. Harry thought about this. He looked at the window, where the evening light was doing something complicated through the trees. Then he picked up his book from the arm of the chair. Carlyle, he said. Yes. Carlyle looked up. The next time you update your notes on me, Harry opened the book to his page. Add that Chelsea's gift doesn't work. And that Dimitri's tracking is something I can feel. Carlyle looked at him for a moment. Then he reached for his notebook. Noted, he said. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Arrow. Not through the usual Volturi channels, not through Chelsea or any intermediary, but via a very old and very silent raven that landed on the porch railing at dawn and waited with the patience of something that had been given specific instructions. The letter was sealed with black wax and the Volturi crest, and it was addressed, in a handwriting that had the quality of something unchanged across centuries, to Harry Cullen. Harry opened it over breakfast. The letter was 1 paragraph. Harry read it and then read it again and then set it down on the table. Edward picked it up. Arrow's letter said, My dear Harry. What a delight it is to finally receive correspondence from you, even indirectly. I must confess that Chelsea's account of your conversation has left me with a considerably higher opinion of you than the reports from my other sources had prepared me for. You are quite right that your existence does not threaten my order, not in the way you mean. What it does represent, however, is something I have not encountered in 3,000 years of looking. I find that I am content, for now, to simply be aware of you. Perhaps one day we will meet in a context of your choosing. I look forward to it with the most genuine curiosity. Your friend, in his fashion, Arrow. The postscript read, Tell Dimitri, when next you see him, that he agrees with your assessment of the situation. He doesn't say so, of course. But I read his thoughts, and he was quite struck by you. Edward set the letter down. He's not done, Bella said. No, Edward agreed. But he's repositioned. He looked at Harry. You made him curious instead of acquisitive. That's a fundamentally different relationship. Curious people watch, Harry said. They don't grab. For now, Edward said. For now is enough, Harry said. He stole a piece of Edward's toast, which Edward hadn't been eating. I have Hogwarts in September. And then we deal with Arrow when we deal with Arrow. You're remarkably calm about having the most dangerous vampire in the world watching you with personal interest, Rosalie said, from the doorway. Harry looked at her. He's watching all of us, Harry said. He has been since before I was born. I've just made it so he's watching with respect instead of appetite. That's an improvement. He said it cleanly, with no performance, and Rosalie looked at him for a moment with the expression she usually directed at very few things, the one that, on Rosalie, meant she was finding something genuinely admirable and was not quite willing to say so out loud. Marginally, she said, and went to get a book. Alice appeared at the bottom of the stairs. His futures are branching like crazy, she reported, meaning Arrow. I can't get a clear read. But the ones where he moves against us, she paused. They're getting shorter. How short? Bella asked. Not gone, Alice said honestly. But shrinking every time Harry does something like today. She looked at Harry. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I'm just being honest with people, Harry said. That's what I mean, Alice said. Keep doing that. Harry turned another page of his book. Outside, the forked summer dripped steadily through the trees, the light coming through in pieces, green gold, and the house settled around its occupants with the quiet solidity of a place that knew what it was, not safe in the way that kept you soft, not easy in the way that kept you blind, but held, thoroughly and completely held, by people who had chosen each other at every possible fork in the road and kept choosing, and intended to keep choosing, regardless of what ancient Italian vampires or dark wizarding fragments or the whole weight of an extraordinary future had to say about it. Harry read his book. Eclipse slept on the windowsill, black and absolute as a gap between stars. The raven had gone. Chapter 6, The Boy Who Chose September arrived and Harry went back to Hogwarts. The second year was different from the first in the specific way that second years were always different. The novelty was gone and what replaced it was familiarity, which was either comfort or complacency depending on what you did with it. Harry treated it as information. He knew the castle now, knew its rhythms, its particular magic, the way it responded to intent the same way everything responded to intent if you paid attention. He knew his professors. He knew his classmates. He knew, from Dumbledore's letter that had arrived in August alongside the second-year book list, that something was happening in the castle that hadn't been happening before. The letter had been careful, Dumbledore was always careful with what he committed to parchment, but the shape of it was clear. There are certain protective enchantments I am reinforcing this year. I hope the term finds you well. I look forward to our first meeting. Harry had written back, I look forward to it too. Are the enchantments for what I think they're for? Dumbledore had replied with a single line, that depends on what you think. Harry had replied, the Chamber of Secrets. Dumbledore had not written back, which was itself an answer. He'd told Ron and Hermione on the train. Ron had gone through the now familiar sequence of pale, determined, and then hungry, in that order, which was Ron's reliable processing pattern for significant information. Hermione had produced a book, Hogwarts, a history, which she'd already read 4 times but apparently found comfort in revisiting, and opened it to a page that she'd marked, which meant she'd already been thinking about this. The chamber, Hermione said, was supposedly built by Salazar Slytherin. It contains a monster that only the heir of Slytherin can control. I know, Harry said. Do you know what the monster is? I have a theory, Harry said. What theory? He looked at her steadily. What's the most dangerous creature a Parselmouth could control? What would Slytherin have considered the weapon most appropriate to his particular brand of wizarding supremacy? Hermione went through the reference catalogue in her mind. Harry could watch it happen, the rapid internal search, and then her face changed. A basilisk, she said. A basilisk, Harry agreed. Ron looked between them. Right, he said. So we're not going into the chamber. I didn't say that, Harry said. You implied. I said there's a basilisk in the chamber. I didn't say anything about what we're doing about it. Harry looked out the window at the countryside moving past. I'm waiting to see if it actually opens first. And if it does? Ron asked. Harry turned back from the window. He had the expression he'd had in front of the mirror of Eriste, the one that was perfectly calm and perfectly decided. Then someone has to deal with it, he said. And I'm the most qualified person in the school. Hermione and Ron looked at each other over his head. He has a point, Hermione said. He always has a point, Ron said. That's what's concerning. The first months of term were ordinary in the best sense. Lockhart was defense against the dark arts, which was an experience in a category by itself. He was spectacular looking, self-promoting, and possessed of the specific confidence that came from having had his competence substituted, somewhere along the line, with his confidence, such that the two had become indistinguishable to him. Harry sat in his first class and watched Lockhart release a cage of Cornish pixies and immediately lose control of them and processed this as data. Hermione, next to him, was in a state of complicated mourning. She'd read all his books, 7 of them, and she was watching the gap between the books and the reality close with the expression of someone whose library was being reorganized against their will. He obliterated the actual people who did those things, Harry said to her, quietly, while Lockhart tried to recover a pixie that had attached itself to his hair. And took credit. She turned to look at him. You can't know that. He doesn't have a single defensive reflex, Harry said. Watch him. Everything he does is a performance. Real competence has texture. It has the specific roughness of things you've actually practiced. He's too smooth. Hermione looked at Lockhart. She looked at Harry. She filed it. If you're right, she said. When I'm right, Harry said, because he was, and they both knew it, we should get him to write down what he actually did and didn't do before someone gets seriously hurt because they believed his books. That's, Harry, you can't just, I can ask Dumbledore, Harry said. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You actually will, won't you? Second month of term, Harry said. After I've got more evidence. The voice came in October. Harry heard it on a Thursday afternoon, moving through a corridor on the second floor, and it was unlike anything he'd heard in the castle before, a sound that was not quite sound, coming from somewhere that was not quite anywhere, a cold, ancient rage threaded through with hunger. It moved through walls the way sound only moved if it wasn't limited by physical structure. He stopped walking. Kill, the voice said, in the dark space between his ears. Rip. Tear. Time to feed. It was moving upward, through the castle's stone, and it was heading. He tracked the direction with the full attention of both his natures simultaneously, northeast. He moved. He didn't run. Running attracted attention and attention asked questions. He walked with the specific velocity of someone going somewhere on purpose, and he traced the voice through 2 corridors and up a staircase and around a corner and then it was gone, the presence of it fading like an echo finding the limits of its space, and Harry stood in a corridor outside the second-floor bathroom and was completely still. Mrs. Norris was hanging from a torch bracket. Water on the floor, spreading from under the bathroom door. And on the wall, in something that had dried to brown red, the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Harry looked at Mrs. Norris. She was stiff, eyes filmed over, petrified rather than dead. He could tell the difference, the animal stillness of petrification versus the emptier stillness of death. He looked at the writing on the wall. He looked at the puddle spreading across the floor. Then the feast let out and 50 students came around the corner. Filch found Mrs. Norris about 30 seconds later and the subsequent events were chaotic in the specific way that castle-wide emergencies were chaotic, a great deal of sound and movement before anyone with authority arrived, and Harry stood at the edge of it and watched Dumbledore appear and examine Mrs. Norris and gather Lockhart and McGonagall and Snape into the bathroom to confer. And he watched the crowd react with the range of human responses to frightening information, and he catalogued it all. Draco Malfoy, from somewhere behind him, said, "Enemies of the heir, beware. You'll be next, mudbloods." Harry turned and looked at him. The crowd quieted in the specific way that crowds quieted when something they recognized as significant was about to happen. Malfoy held Harry's gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable for him, and Harry could see, had always been able to see, the difference between what Malfoy performed and what Malfoy was, and what Malfoy was in this moment was a boy who had heard the words from his father and thought they were the right words and was now, under Harry's gaze, running some kind of background calculation about whether he still thought so. "Think carefully," Harry said, quietly, "about what you're celebrating." Malfoy blinked. "Something's in this castle that's going to hurt people," Harry said. "If you know anything about it, Malfoy, anything your father's told you, you should think about what it means to let that continue." "My father, I'm not talking about your father," Harry said. "I'm talking about you." He held Malfoy's eyes. "You're not stupid. Don't act like it." He turned and went back to Gryffindor Tower, and the crowd parted for him without really meaning to. November. December. The attacks continued. Colin Creevey, petrified. Justin Finch Fletchley. The ghost, nearly headless Nick, who could not be fully petrified but was deeply unwell in a ghost-specific way. Hermione, in early December, because she'd been doing exactly what Hermione did, running ahead of the problem with her brain at full extension, and she'd gotten too close too fast and the basilisk had caught the edge of her reflection in someone's dropped mirror. Harry visited her in the hospital wing every day. He sat beside her petrified form and talked, the way you talk to someone in a coma, which was with the full conviction that being heard mattered even without confirmation. He told her about the theory he was building. He'd figured out the entrance, narrowed it to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, was working on the mechanism. He told her about the letter from Edward who had been following the basilisk situation with what Harry described to Hermione as intensive parental concern, which was Edward speak for a low-level continuous state of readiness to drive to Scotland. He told her about Parseltongue. He'd known since September that he could speak it, he'd heard the basilisk's voice in October and understood it, which meant he could use it, which meant something about his magical inheritance that he'd already discussed with Dumbledore. "You carry it from Voldemort," Dumbledore had said, carefully, and Harry had nodded and said "I know," and Dumbledore had looked at him with the expression he had when Harry demonstrated that he'd already processed something that Dumbledore was preparing to gently introduce. "I can open the chamber," Harry told Hermione's petrified form. "As soon as I know exactly what I'm going into. I'm not going blind." He picked up the crumpled piece of parchment in Hermione's stiffened hand. She'd been holding it when she was petrified, which was the most Hermione thing possible, petrified mid-research, and unfolded it. "Pipes," Hermione had written. "It moves through the pipes. And below that, basilisk. Don't look directly." He sat back. She'd known. She'd gotten there and she'd written it down so whoever found her would know too, because she was Hermione and being petrified was not going to stop her from completing the research. "You're brilliant," he told her. "We're going to talk about this when you're better and you're going to be impossibly smug about it." He went to Dumbledore in January. Dumbledore's office was the specific kind of room that revealed character, not dramatically, the way stage sets revealed character, but in the way of a room that had been lived in for decades, accumulated and considered, everything present because it had earned its place. The portraits of former headmasters watched Harry come in with the assorted expressions of people who had their own opinions and intended to keep them. He sat in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk and put Hermione's parchment on the desk between them. Dumbledore read it. He already knew, Harry thought, he'd suspected, probably, for months, but suspicion and evidence were different things and Dumbledore was the kind of man who operated differently on each. Now he had evidence. "The entrance is in Myrtle's bathroom," Harry said. "A sink. I can open it because I speak Parseltongue." "I see," Dumbledore said. I'm going in, Harry said. Harry, I've thought about it carefully, Harry said, not curtly but not negotiably either. I'm the only person in this castle who can navigate the chamber, control the basilisk if necessary, and manage whatever's down there. Sending adults who can't communicate with a basilisk is sending people into a situation they can't fully control. He paused. I can control it. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. He did this thing, had done it since the dungeon in first year, Harry had noticed, where he seemed to be genuinely reconsidering something in real time, actually revising, not performing revision. It was one of the things Harry found most trustworthy about him. You've already written to your father, Dumbledore said. Yes. What did he say? He said if I wait until the Christmas holidays he'll come with me. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. A vampire in the Chamber of Secrets. He's not a vampire in the Chamber of Secrets, Harry said. He's my father with the Chamber of Secrets. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not going alone. But I'm going. Another pause. The portraits murmured. Fawkes, on his perch in the corner, tilted his head at Harry with the attention of a creature that was very old and recognized something. The basilisk, Dumbledore said. If it comes to a direct confrontation, I know how to handle it. You're 12. Nearly 12, Harry said, which was technically not right anymore because the birthday was in July, and for a moment the absurdity of it caught him and he almost smiled. I know what I'm going into, Professor. I've been preparing since October. I'm not improvising. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, your mother would have done exactly this. I know, Harry said. She told me, in the letter. She said she was terrible at waiting when she knew what needed doing. Something moved in Dumbledore's face. Yes, he said. Yes, she was. Will you help me prepare? Harry asked. I don't need to be talked out of it. I need to know everything you know about what's down there, about Tom Riddle and how he opened it the last time, about what the basilisk's weaknesses are beyond the obvious ones. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, moved to his bookcase, and began to pull volumes. Christmas in Forks. Edward arrived in Edinburgh 2 days before the holidays began, because of course he did, because the idea of Harry taking the night bus back to Forks was something Edward had apparently considered and then decisively decided against, and Harry walked out of the castle gate and found his father leaning against a rental car in the grey Scottish afternoon looking exactly like what he was. Someone who had driven through the night and was not going to say that this was anything other than a perfectly routine pickup. Harry threw his bag in the boot and got in the passenger seat and they drove for 20 minutes in comfortable silence before Edward said, Tell me everything about the chamber. Harry told him everything. Edward listened without interrupting, which was his habit, and Harry laid it out from October through Hermione's parchment through the meeting with Dumbledore, and when he finished Edward was quiet for a moment longer. The basilisk, Edward said. I know. Direct eye contact, kills, Harry said. Yes. I won't look at it directly. And if it's too large to avoid in a confined space? I can hear it, Harry said. Both natures hear it differently. The magic hears the intent, the venom sense hears the physical, I'll know where it is before it gets close enough to matter. And the diary, Edward said. The object you think is down there. Harry had explained this, the theory that had been building since October, the sense that the opening of the chamber was not the basilisk's independent action but a controlled one, that someone or something was directing it. The diary. He'd pieced it together from Ginny Weasley's behavior through the autumn, the way she'd become hollowed out, the way certain things had happened in correlative time with the changes in her. There's a fragment of Voldemort in it, Harry said. The same way there was a fragment in Quirrell. But older. Preserved differently. Not possessing from outside, growing from inside. He paused. Ginny's been writing in it. It's been writing back. Whatever's in it has been building itself up on her. Edward was very still. I recognize the feeling, Harry said, quietly. When Quirrell touched me, the fragment, the thing in him, I could feel what it was. I've been feeling something similar from Ginny since October. The signature's the same. Edward looked at the road. When, he said. February, Harry said. Maybe March. Long enough for Hermione to be unpetrified. Madame Pomfrey's got the Mandrake draft almost ready, so she can know what's happening. And so I have more time to prepare. I'm coming with you, Edward said. I know, Harry said. I assumed. That's why I asked Dumbledore about the logistics of getting a vampire through a Hogwarts entrance that was built in the 10th century. Edward looked at him. He said, Harry continued, and I'm quoting, I imagine that if I told the enchantments they were for protection of a student rather than intrusion, they would be considerably more cooperative. So. He looked out the window at the Scottish countryside in winter, grey and austere and beautiful. February. February came. Hermione was unpetrified on the 3rd of February and spent approximately 6 hours catching up on everything that had happened and then said, We need to go tonight, the basilisk attacked again last night, a Hufflepuff 5th year, he's in the hospital wing, Harry we need to go now. Tomorrow, Harry said. Sleep. We go tomorrow. She looked at him with the eyes of a person who wanted to argue and recognized the futility. Your dad's here, isn't he, she said. He's in Hogsmeade, Harry said. He got here 3 days ago. And he's been waiting 3 days. He's very patient, Harry said. He's had practice. She slept. Harry wrote to Edward, tomorrow, Myrtle's bathroom, midnight, and then he went to Dumbledore's office and sat with the headmaster in the firelight and they went over everything one final time, and Dumbledore gave him 2 things, a small silver knife that had been charmed with a basilisk-specific severing enchantment that he'd spent 6 months preparing, and Fawkes, who sat on Harry's shoulder for a moment and sang a single bar of something that settled into Harry's blood like warmth. Phoenix song strengthens the spirit, Dumbledore said. And Fawkes can carry things that cannot be carried any other way. Harry looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked at Harry. Thank you, Harry said, to both of them. Midnight. Myrtle's bathroom. Edward was there when they arrived. He'd moved through the castle with the ease of something the enchantments had decided, apparently, to permit, and he was standing near the sink when Harry, Ron, and Hermione came through the door. He looked at his son. Harry looked at him. I'm fine, Harry said, preemptively. I know, Edward said. He looked at Ron and Hermione. Thank you for being here. Ron said, yeah, well. Hermione said nothing but her expression said considerable things. Harry crouched in front of the sink. He looked at the small engraved serpent on the tap. He spoke to it, and the sounds that came out of his mouth were Parseltongue, not the hissing stage performance that people imagined, but something more fluid, something that had texture and intent wound through it, and the tap glowed and the sink moved and the entrance dropped open in the floor. A pipe, descending into darkness. Ron looked at it. Of course it's a pipe, he said. It comes out in the chamber, Harry said. Probably a significant drop. How significant? Significant, Harry said. They went down. The Chamber of Secrets was enormous. That was the first thing, the sheer scale of it, the ceiling 30 feet above them lost in darkness, the long central aisle flanked by stone columns carved with serpents that wound up them like vines. The magic here was different from the rest of Hogwarts, older, denser, a different frequency, the specific magical signature of Salazar Slytherin who had built this to last and built it to exclude and built it with the absolute conviction of someone who believed his opinions were facts. Harry felt it in his blood the way he felt everything, both registers, the warm one reading the magic and the cold one reading the darkness, and what the cold one read was a concentration of that wrong familiar frequency that he'd been tracking since October. The diary. The fragment. Ahead, at the end of the chamber, the carved stone face of Salazar Slytherin rose from the floor to the ceiling. And in front of it, on the stone floor, Ginny Weasley lay unmoving. Ron made a sound. Stay here, Harry said, to Ron and Hermione. He walked forward. The boy leaning against the stone wall beside Ginny was approximately 16 years old, or had the appearance of 16, the specific preserved quality of something reconstructed from memory and will and borrowed life. He was dark-haired and handsome, and he watched Harry approach with eyes that were interested and assessing and not even slightly concerned, and in his hand he held a wand that was not his own. Ginny's wand. Harry Potter, Tom Riddle said. Tom Riddle, Harry said. A pause. Riddle's head tilted slightly. I wasn't sure what to expect, he said. The stories have been inconsistent. His eyes moved over Harry with the focused attention of someone who was reading at several levels simultaneously. You're different from them. Yes, Harry said. Different from what I was at your age, Riddle said, and there was something in it, not admiration, exactly, but the recognition of a peer, or what he thought might be a peer. I can feel it. There's something in you that's not quite human. Not quite one of them either. His eyes were curious. What did they do to you? Nothing was done to me, Harry said. Something happened. There's a difference. Riddle looked at him with the interest of someone who had been waiting a long time for a genuinely interesting conversation. He'd had 11 years in the diary, feeding on Ginny's thoughts and fears, and the quality of that experience had made him hungry for something more substantive. I know about the vampires, Riddle said. I've read everything Ginny knew, and she knew the rumors. The Cullen family. He said the name with the specific effect of a 16-year-old who had been the most impressive person in every room he'd ever been in. You let them change you. The venom didn't change me, Harry said. It became part of me. There's a difference. A philosophical distinction. A factual one, Harry said. He was looking at Ginny. Her chest was rising and falling, shallow, slow, the life still in her but stretched thin. She's still alive. For now, Riddle said. The more solid I become, the less there is of her. It's a necessary transaction. Give her back, Harry said. Riddle looked at him with something that was almost amused. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. I need a body, a real one. This one, he looked at Ginny with the dispassionate consideration of someone evaluating a tool. It will do. Destroy the diary, Harry said, and you stop existing. Give me the diary. You can't touch it, Riddle said. It's warded. The moment, Harry looked at the diary, open on the floor beside Ginny. He reached out with the pushing outward feeling, the same one he'd used in the yard with Emmett, the same one that had stopped pine cones and held 24 objects in orbit, the same one that had redirected Quirrell's curses, and lifted the diary off the floor. It floated to him and he caught it. Riddle's expression changed. The ward was designed for wizards, Harry said. Or vampires. It couldn't account for both simultaneously. Clever, Riddle said, and now the tone had shifted, the peer recognition recalibrating into something more dangerous, the specific quality of someone who had underestimated a threat and was updating. He raised Ginny's wand. But a diary can be destroyed without destroying me, Potter. I need this body, no, Harry said. He was already moving, not away, forward, toward Riddle, which Riddle was clearly not expecting because Riddle was 16 years of preserved certainty about how confrontations were supposed to go, and when Riddle cast the curse Harry's shield came up not between him and the spell but around the diary in his hand, the cold blue shield wrapping the book completely, and the curse deflected off it into the ceiling. Riddle stared. Your shield wandless, I've been practicing, Harry said. He was 5 feet from Riddle now and Riddle was doing something Harry could feel, pouring more of whatever borrowed life he had into his own form, drawing harder on Ginny, and Ginny's breathing went shallower and Ron made a sound from behind them. That's enough, Harry said. He took the silver knife from his belt. Riddle moved, fast, genuinely fast, he was working on Hogwarts-level power drawn from a living host, and Harry moved too, and the knife went into the diary with the specific, deliberate force of someone who had already decided and was executing the decision. The sound the diary made when the knife hit it was nothing like paper. It was something older, something that resonated in the same frequency as the wrong familiar feeling Harry had been tracking since October, and it tore through the chamber like a scream from a register humans weren't really meant to hear. Riddle looked at the knife in the diary. At Harry. At the ink pouring from the wound in the book like black blood, spattering the stone floor. His form was already losing coherence, the edges of him going soft, the constructed certainty of his features beginning to blur. "What are you?" he said, and for the first time it was not rhetorical. "Something that doesn't have a name yet," Harry said. "You could have been like me," Riddle said, and it was quieter now, the bravado dropping as the borrowed life dropped, and underneath it was something that was nearly human. "The power. You have more of it than I had at your age, you have more than I had at any age, I know," Harry said. "And I chose what to do with it." "Chose," Riddle said, like the word was foreign to him. "Yes," Harry said. "That's the difference between us." Riddle's form dissolved. Not dramatically, not in a way that involved fire or spectacle. It simply unmade itself, the borrowed structure returning to nothing, the fragment of a soul that had been clinging to the edges of a book for 50 years finally, completely, ceasing. The diary hit the floor. Ink pooled around it. On the floor beside it, Ginny Weasley gasped. Ron was across the chamber in 3 strides, pulling his sister upright, and Ginny grabbed his arms and breathed and made sounds that were not quite words, and Ron held her and said her name several times in the very straightforward way of someone who is mostly anger but is concentrating on relief first. Harry stood over the ruined diary and felt the chamber settle around them, the ancient oppressive magic of it shifting, the purpose it had been built to serve broken, the weight of 50 years of dormant threat finally, completely gone. He felt it go in both registers, the warm and the cold. Edward was beside him. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He held the knife and looked at the black ink spreading across the stone and thought about Tom Riddle saying "you could have been like me" with a 16-year-old certainty, and he thought about what he'd said back, "I chose," and the thing he felt was not triumph, exactly. It was something quieter. The satisfaction of something completed. "You hesitated," Edward said, quietly, so only Harry could hear. "Before you used the knife." "I know," Harry said. "Not from fear." "No," Harry said. He was interesting. He was terrible and he was interesting and I could see exactly how he'd gotten there and it made me sad, a little. That he'd had all that and turned it into nothing worth having." He turned the knife in his hand. "He didn't have anyone." Edward was quiet. "He said I could have been like him," Harry said. "He was wrong. But I understood what he meant. Power without people," Harry said. "Without," he gestured, somewhat awkwardly for someone who could stop pine cones mid-air and dissolve dark fragments with his bare hands. "Without this. Without any of it." He looked at Edward. He was completely alone and he'd been alone for so long he thought that was what power looked like. Edward held his son's gaze. "That's a generous reading of someone who just tried to kill a 12-year-old girl." "Yes," Harry said. "But it's the true one." Hermione appeared at Harry's other side, looking at the diary with the expression she had when something confirmed a theory she'd have preferred to be wrong about. "Horcrux," she said. Both Harry and Edward looked at her. "It's in the Dark Arts Outsmarted, in the restricted section," she said. "I read it after you told me about the diary theory. An object infused with a fragment of a soul, it's called a Horcrux. It requires," she stopped. "The magic required to make one is," she looked at the ruined book on the floor. "There might be more of them." Harry looked at her. She met his eyes steadily. "Yes," he said, and that one word covered everything, the acknowledgement, the understanding of what it meant, the weight of a problem that was not ended tonight, that was never going to be simply over, that was going to keep requiring the choice, again and again, of what to do with power and how to use it and why. "We'll figure it out," she said. "I know," he said. Dumbledore's face, when they walked into his office at 2 a.m, moved through several things in rapid succession: relief, the specific gravity of someone who had been prepared for a worse outcome, and then the particular expression he'd been giving Harry since the dungeon in first year. Edward was with them. He stood slightly behind Harry, and Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who had been told things and was now experiencing the thing itself, which were different in the specific way that all important experiences were different from their descriptions. "You're Edward Cullen," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Edward said. "Harry's described you." "I'm aware of Harry's descriptions of me," Edward said, with a dryness that produced a very small smile from Dumbledore. Ginny was with McGonagall. Ron and Hermione had gone to the dormitories at Harry's instruction with the understanding that a full account could happen in the morning. The diary was on Dumbledore's desk, destroyed, ink-stained, and Dumbledore was looking at it with the expression of someone whose worst theory had been confirmed. "A Horcrux," Harry said. Dumbledore looked up. "Hermione identified it," Harry said. "If she's right, and she's right, there are more." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "How many, Professor?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The portraits listened. Fawkes made a low sound. "I have been working," Dumbledore said, carefully, "on a theory about Tom Riddle's, about Voldemort's, method of achieving his apparent immortality. I have not been certain enough of my conclusions to bring them to you yet." "Be certain enough now," Harry said. Another pause. Dumbledore looked at him, and then at Edward, and then back at Harry, and something in him made the decision that was visible in the settling of his posture. He told them. 6 Horcruxes, he suspected. 7 pieces, with the piece still in Voldemort's body. The diary was one, confirmed, destroyed. The others required finding, required the kind of patient intelligence gathering that Dumbledore had been quietly doing for years. "We destroy them," Harry said, when Dumbledore finished. "All of them. Before he can return properly, before he has a body and the full power of a complete soul, we destroy every one." "Harry, the process of finding them, I know it's not fast," Harry said. "I know it's going to take time and it's going to be dangerous and some of them are going to be in terrible places." He leaned forward. "I know all of that. I'm saying we do it anyway. All of us. Together." He looked at Edward, briefly, and then back at Dumbledore. "And I want to be part of every step. No more preparing me gradually. No more information held back until I'm ready. I'm ready." Dumbledore looked at him across the desk, this 12-year-old who had just destroyed a fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard of the century in a 1,000-year-old chamber, who had carried his dead mother's letter for a year before he was ready to read it, who had looked at a 3,000-year-old vampire's messenger and sent back a message of his own. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I believe you are." They walked out of the castle at 3 in the morning, Harry and Edward, into the dark grounds, the loch black and still to the east and the forest a darker mass to the west and the sky overhead the specific Scottish winter black that had no stars to speak of, just cloud and cold and the suggestion of mountain somewhere further beyond. Harry had his hands in his pockets. Eclipse had found him somehow, materialized from whatever window she'd been watching through, and was on his shoulder, black as the sky, occasionally pressing her head against his temple with the checking-in manner of an owl who had strong opinions about separations longer than 2 hours. They walked in silence for a while. Not empty silence, the kind that came after significant things, where speaking too soon would be disrespectful to the weight of what had happened. Then Harry said, "He said I could have been like him." "I heard," Edward said. "I know why I'm not." Edward looked at him. "It's not the power," Harry said. "Tom Riddle had power. And he chose to be afraid of death and then he chose to be afraid of weakness and then he chose to be afraid of love because love looked like weakness and somewhere in all that choosing from fear he forgot that he was choosing. He pulled his collar up against the cold. I'm not afraid of any of those things." "No," Edward said. "You're not. Because of you," Harry said. "You and Bella and all of them. Not because you made me unafraid. Because you showed me what unafraid looked like. What it looked like to choose things from wanting them instead of from fearing their opposites. Edward was quiet for a moment. "I found you in a cupboard," he said, "and I thought we were rescuing you." Harry glanced up at him. "I know," Edward said. "I know what actually happened. I've known for years." He looked at his son in the dark Scottish night, this extraordinary, impossible, entirely particular person who had been made from loss and luck and the specific accident of a fence to a back garden being unlocked on a rainy November evening. "You rescued us too, Harry. I want you to know I know that." Harry was quiet for a moment. The lock moved slightly in the dark, a small private sound. Then he said, "I know you know." "Good," Edward said. They walked a little further. "I want to read the other Horcrux locations with you," Harry said. "Whatever Dumbledore has. I want to understand the full shape of it." "I know. And next summer I want Carlisle to run the full tests again. The dual-state cells, I could feel them differently in the chamber." Something shifted again. "He'll be glad to," Edward said. "And I want," Harry stopped walking. Edward stopped beside him. Harry was looking at the castle, at the towers lit against the dark sky, the great hall's windows, the specific silhouette of a place that was, whatever else it was, his in some real way. He was thinking about Hermione saying there might be more of them with the quiet determination of someone who had assessed a problem and was already preparing for it. He was thinking about Ron sitting on the chamber floor holding Ginny and saying her name. He was thinking about Tom Riddle dissolving and what Riddle had said in those last moments. He was thinking about Lily Potter and backwards clocks and a letter he'd read in a Forks kitchen at 6 in the morning while his family gave him space. "I want this to be enough for now," Harry said. "What happened tonight? I want, not forever. I know there's more coming. I know what's coming is large." He turned to look at Edward. "But tonight I want it to just be this. We went in, we came out, Ginny's alive, the fragment is gone. That's enough for tonight." Edward looked at his son. "Yes," he said. "That's enough for tonight." Harry nodded. He tilted his head back and looked at the dark sky where the stars weren't, and Eclipse adjusted her grip on his shoulder and the castle stood behind them, old and complete and full of sleeping people who didn't know what had happened under their feet, and the night was cold and wide and entirely adequate. "I'm going to write to Bella when I get inside," Harry said. "She's been awake since midnight," Edward said. "I know," Harry said. "She always is." He looked at the sky for another moment. Then he turned toward the castle, and his father walked beside him, and the lights of Hogwarts pulled them in from the dark like they were the most natural thing in the world, which they were, or which they had become, or which amounted to the same thing. Harry Potter, who was Harry Cullen, who was the Blood Prince, who was 12 years old and entirely himself, went inside.